Hi, I'm Rowena. I sold the one thing that reminded me of my father, my favorite cardo, helped my sister build her dream. And when I showed up to her Christmas party, she looked me in the eye and said, "Sorry, this is a private event." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing it hadn't been a mistake, it had been a plan. The speeches I wrote, the business I helped launch, the debt I quietly carried, all erased. Just like that. And now I wonder how many of us are helping build someone else's empire, only to be locked out when the doors finally open. The air outside Callista's home had that kind of sharpness that only Southern California knows how to fake, just cool enough to make you think you might need a coat, but dry and empty, like the conversations I expected to walk into. I stood there for a moment, fingers tightening around the small gift it wrapped with more care than I cared to admit. Simple frame, hand-stained wood, holding a photo of the car I once loved and let go. The lights along the hedges blinked in uneven rhythms, warm white, icy blue. Too perfect, too rehearsed, like the life my sister had curated ever since she decided she was meant for more. I took a breath, walked to the front entrance, and smiled at the young man in a blazer holding a tablet. He didn't smile back. "Name, please?" he asked, flat as a boardroom. "Rowena Lark," I said. He typed. Paused. Typed again. Then gave me that expression, part apology, part confusion, all annoyance. "Sorry, you're not on the list." Before I could offer an explanation, I heard the click of heels behind him. Callista. She looked like a department store holiday ad. Sleek, controlled. Red velvet dress, minimal jewelry, and that same practiced half-smile she'd been using since she got featured in Inkier magazine. "I didn't know you'd actually come," she said, brushing past the man and stepping slightly in front of me, just enough to make it clear who was in charge. I wish you'd told me first. This is kind of a private thing, for partners and media." She didn't say it cruelly, just matter of fact, as if stating it that way excused what it meant. I nodded slowly. Right, a private thing. There was a long beat. She didn't move. Neither did I. The air got even drier. Then someone called her name from inside, and she turned. "I'll try to find you later," she said over her shoulder. I didn't wait. A woman I vaguely recognized from one of her brand launches saw me, smiled politely, and whispered something to the staff. Seconds later, I was being walked through a side entrance, like a package someone forgot they ordered. Inside, everything shimmered. The scent of pine and sugared citrus floated above the buzz of jazz and conversation. People stood in circles, laughing tightly. I kept my gaze down, weaving through them until I found my table near the back, behind a massive floral pillar. The name card said Rana L. Clark, not only misspelled, not even my name. I sat down slowly, smoothing my skirt. No one at the table acknowledged me. They were mid-discussion about brand collabs and seed rounds. I tried to follow, but the blood in my ears made everything throb. I told myself it was just a clerical error, that her assistant must have been overwhelmed, that Callista hadn't meant to leave me out. That was the beginning of the rationalizations. The same kind had made the last 3 years, when she forgot my birthday, when she postponed visiting after my minor surgery, when she told people I was between things professionally. Last Christmas, we'd shared a blanket on the old couch in my apartment, eating store-bought sugar cookies. She'd said, "Next year, I'll have a real place for us to celebrate. Promise." Apparently, I wasn't part of the US anymore. A man sat down beside me, mid-40s, pressed jacket, strong cologne. He looked at me, slightly puzzled. "Are you with catering?" he asked. I turned to him, keeping my voice even. "No," I said. "I'm family." My lips curved just slightly, but my fingers dug into my lap so tightly I thought the fabric might tear. The hum of conversation in the party behind me had dulled to a low, constant murmur, but inside my chest, everything was still pounding. I sat frozen at that misspelled place card, trying to make sense of how I'd ended up here unseen, unnamed. It wasn't the first time he'd been overlooked, just the most public. My eyes drifted to the glossy Art Deco chandelier overhead. Its dangling crystal arms sparkled as servers passed by, with silver trays of pomegranate cocktails. And all I could think about was Ventura last winter standing in the icy morning sun, saying goodbye to the one thing I never thought I'd let go. The car had been a gift from my father, a 1976 Volvo wagon, all steel and soul. Wed restored it together when I was in college, scrubbing engine grease from our hands on Sunday afternoons, arguing over paint colors, laughing too hard when the horn got stuck once on a freeway ramp. That car had held the weight of every failed interview, every crosstown move, every first date. I sold it on a Tuesday morning to a man named Dennis, with a firm handshake and a soft voice. I watched him drive it off the lot like he was taking a part of me with him. "It's not just a car," I remember whispering. "It's where I learned to grieve, to plan, to dream." But I sold it anyway. Because Callista had called. One of her investors had walked away last minute. "It was critical," she said, time-sensitive. She didn't ask directly, but she didn't have to. I knew what she needed, and I had just enough saved from freelance projects to bridge the gap. "Thanks, Ro," she'd said over the phone. "You're a lifesaver. I'll make this count." She didn't mention it again. Not when the campaign launched. Not at the company anniversary. Not even in private. No card. No acknowledgement. Not even an email that said, "I know what you did." I didn't ask. I told myself I didn't need to. That sisters didn't keep score. That this was what family looked like, quiet giving. But a few months later, I found myself in her kitchen with a clipboard in my hand and a pen full of liability ink. She'd been working on her first office lease in downtown Santa Barbara, and when it came to financials, mine looked slightly better. "Your credit's just a little cleaner," she'd said, all smiles. "It's just a formality, really. Legal stuff. I've already got it covered. This just helps the approval." I read every word. I paused at the fine print. Then I signed. Because I wanted to be trusted. Needed to be useful. That was the second time I disappeared. It wasn't until a brunch a few months later that I heard her say it. I'd come late, sat at the end of the table, unnoticed, sipping weak coffee and pretending I wasn't listening. A woman across from her leaned in and asked, "How did you even pull this off?" Callista smiled with practiced ease and said, "I built this with no help. No one believed in me but me." The words cut sharper than I expected. Not angry, just final. That sentence became a silent echo in my head, repeating at red lights and checkout lines. Back at the party, the air felt tighter now. Someone near me was laughing at something. The jazz music had shifted to a sultry swing. I turned slightly in my chair, and that's when I saw it, hanging on the far gallery wall, framed in brushed gold. The license plate, my car's plate, our car, the one from all those Sunday afternoons. Underneath it, a small black placard with white text read, "The journey begins here, Callista Dorn, founder." My body didn't move, but inside something cracked, just a hairline fracture. My hands folded into themselves on my lap. My throat closed a little. No one else noticed. That was the moment I realized not only had I sold my car, I had signed away my voice. I stayed in that chair longer than I meant to. People passed by, laughing politely, their drinks sloshing in crystal glasses, none of them noticing the woman tucked behind the flower wall. The misspelled name card was still in front of me, but I stopped looking at it. Toast after toast filled the room, each one glossier than the last, tributes to visionaries, strategists, mentors. One man clinked his glass and toasted the photographer for capturing the soul of the brand. Another thanked the intern who designed the seasonal scent line. Callista beamed with every name mentioned. Mine didn't come up. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small notebook I'd started keeping the day I sold my car. Inside were scribbled notes, amounts, dates, moments. Not out of bitterness. I just didn't want to forget. Didn't want the memory of what I gave to vanish as easily as my name had. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. Callista stepped onto the low stage near the piano, her champagne glass raised delicately. "I want to share something personal," she began, Voice soft, practiced. A piece I wrote a few months ago during a hard season. Every word is ministrate from the heart. I sat up straighter. My stomach turned. She began reading. The words were mine. Line by line, metaphor by metaphor, I listened as Callista delivered the very essay I had written in a moment of late-night reflection. I had sent it to her in June asking if it resonated. I never heard back. Now she was reading it to an audience that applauded her resilience, her depth, her voice. I didn't clap. I just stared, frozen. The applause roared, and she bowed her head like the words had bled from her soul. It took everything in me not to stand and say, "That was mine," but something in me knew it wouldn't matter. Not in this room, not yet. A man at the next table pulled out his phone. "Isn't this the new site?" he asked the woman beside him. "Looks amazing." I leaned over slightly, just enough to see the screen. There it was, vitalgracewellness.com, the branding ID, built pixel by pixel. I remembered the sleepless weekend I spent hand-coding the footer because the design plugin kept crashing. But now, the footer read, Site Design by Blue Fern Creative. My name? Nowhere. My contribution? Rebranded. They kept my work. But erased my name, I whispered. More to myself than anyone. Story of my life. I excused myself quietly. No one noticed. I stepped past the dessert trays, the string quartet, the photo booth with its faux marble backdrop and ring light. I passed the wall lined with press clippings Forbes Inc. Thrive Global. All with Callista's face, Callista's name. None with mine. A little boy stood nearby, clutching a cupcake. "Is she the assistant?" he asked, pointing at me. His mother smiled gently and said, "No, sweetie. Assistants don't sit at the guest tables." They walked off before I could laugh or cry. I kept walking, slipping out through the side door into the garden. The cold air hit hard. The lights from inside blurred in the condensation forming along my glasses. I leaned against the stone railing overlooking the hills. I hadn't meant to come tonight, but something told me I needed to. That maybe this was the year she would see me. The year she'd say my name, not just as her sister, but as someone who mattered. But all night, I'd been the +1 to my own story. "I'm not the assistant," I whispered into the dark. The words came out shakier than I expected, because for a long time, part of me had believed I was. The cold tile steadied me, my palms pressed against the porcelain edge of the sink, fingers splayed as if bracing for an aftershock. My chest rose and fell like it'd been holding my breath for years. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, lipstick blurred, eyes puffier than I dared admit even to myself. There was something hollow in my expression, like it'd been edited out of my own life and hadn't noticed until now. I dabbed beneath my eyes, smoothed my hair, wiped the faint smudge at the corner of my mouth. Lipstick residue, probably from the glass I barely touched all night. I didn't feel like drinking. I didn't feel like celebrating. "You're just tired," I whispered. My voice barely echoed above the low hum of music through the restroom door. "It's just the holidays, that's all." But even that lie had worn thin. I didn't believe it anymore, not tonight. My phone buzzed on the counter beside me. A notification, YouTube. I already knew. Callista Pierce. Owning my space, a woman's journey alone. TEDx had gone live. Her talk. The one she spent weeks practicing. The one I helped write. My thumb hovered over the screen before pressing play. Her voice filled the tiny restroom, crisp and confident, framed by a red circle on a stage. Her hair perfect. Lighting flawless. But it wasn't just the aesthetics that made my breath catch, it was her words. My words. She opened with the same line I'd once scrawled on a napkin at her kitchen table, late one night, over lukewarm tea and business grant paperwork. "There is no ladder if no one holds it steady." I remembered the grant Clearly Women in Business Foundation. I wasn't even applying. She was. But she needed a narrative that fit the diversity criteria, so she asked if I'd share mine. My background, my struggles. Just to frame the story, she'd said. It's not lying. It's collaborating. I'd said yes. Of course I had. She promised, we're building this together. You'll be on the board one day, but branding needs a single voice right now. That voice was hers. The platform, the check, the spotlight, it all went to her. And I clapped from the third row the night she won. I stood up for the standing ovation. I told myself she meant well, that she'd make space for me. Eventually. But tonight, the illusion cracked wide open. I pressed pause and stared at the frozen frame of her smiling mid-sentence. Her hair blown back just right, her hand raised like she was offering wisdom to the world. And all I saw was a mask made of pieces she'd stolen from me. I tucked the phone into my clutch and straightened my shoulders. The restroom door creaked open behind me as I stepped out. The music hadn't missed a beat. Neither had the people. Laughter rolled across the room like waves over glass. The kind of joy that feels choreographed. I walked toward the dessert table just to blend in, just to do something with my hands. Then I saw her, Callista, wearing the exact same dress, or, rather, the version that wasn't thrifted. Hers shimmered under the light emerald silk, tailored to perfection, neckline just sharp enough to be memorable. Mine was a quiet imitation, same cut, less fabric in the lining, no designer tag sewn into the collar. She caught my eye instantly, raised her glass like we were old friends, and then, with a voice as smooth and deadly as cut glass, she said, "Looks like my little sister found my old taste. I love recycling." The words landed like a slap that everyone else mistook for a joke. The people around her chuckled. Lightly, like background extras in a scene they didn't understand, like they thought I was part of the punchline. I smiled, small, civilized, aware that a bigger reaction would only feed her. I turned and walked away, through the noise, past the clinking glasses and the curated lighting, into the hallway, somewhere quieter, somewhere I could breathe. I pulled out my phone again, opened a blank message, typed slowly, deliberately, "You don't get to do this to me again?" No salutation, no softening, just truth. I stared at it, hovered over send, then deleted it. She wouldn't read it. Not the way it needed to be read, not yet. Not until it would cost her to ignore it. I gripped the phone tighter and stared at the blank wall ahead. I thought of hallway coat hooks, those quiet things screwed into drywall to carry the weight of everyone's coats, bags, scarves. No thanks, no notice, just silent service. And when they snap under pressure, nobody blames the coats, they replace the hook. That's what it'd been, all these years. Not the architect, not the guest of honor, just the hardware. And I was done being part of someone else's structure. I stepped back into the room, not sheepish, not invisible, just there. And that was enough to disrupt something. She was still holding court near the fireplace, surrounded by men in suits and women in curated laughter. Her hand rested on someone's sleeve, her smile perfectly open-mouthed, the one she reserved for networking and cameras. Then she looked up. Our eyes met across the room. This time, I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I didn't shrink. I let the silence say everything. And for the first time in our entire lives, Callista blinked first. She saw it. She saw that I wasn't going to stay quiet forever. The farther I walked from the main ballroom, the quieter everything became. The laughter, the music, the clinking of champagne flutes all faded behind me, swallowed by thick walls and expensive insulation. Out here, the house had a different rhythm. A quiet hum pulsed from a vent tucked into the ceiling, and somewhere nearby, someone adjusted cutlery on fine china. That was all. Even my heels, clicking against the polished tile, seemed hesitant to disturb this part of the house. I reached the end of the corridor, where a warm amber glow spilled from a doorway on the right. The gallery? Callista's so-called private collection. It was anything but private. The room was curated to perfection, every spotlight, every frame, every object precisely positioned for maximum impact. Not for intimacy, but for applause. Callista never let go of anything she thought might earn her admiration, And I knew the moment I crossed the threshold that she hadn't let go of me, either. Not really. My eyes went straight to the wall across from the entrance. There it was, mounted in a sleek shadow box frame, my old license plate. Black and white, slightly dented along the bottom edge, faint flecks of rust along the corners. I hadn't seen it in years, but I would have recognized it anywhere. The car it came from wasn't just a car. It was ours, me father's and mine. We rebuilt it together the summer after I turned 16. Scraped knuckles, Sunday mornings in the driveway. It wasn't just about fixing something up, it was about building something that was ours, from the ground up. Later, I sold it. Quietly. Because Callista's business was struggling and she needed to make payroll. She never asked. I never told her it was from the car fund. I just wired the money, said I believed in her, and I meant it. Now it hung here, on her wall, rebranded. Beneath the plate was a small plaque, polished aluminum. It read, "The journey begins, Callista Dorn's first leap." No mention of me, no acknowledgement. Just another object transformed into part of her mythology. I stood there, unmoving, until my breath fogged the glass. I didn't touch it, didn't have to. My reflection warped across the display, muted, stretched. Like the truth in this whole house. I stepped back, blinking. Then turned to go and nearly walked straight into a couple entering from the other side. They froze. For a moment, none of us said anything. Their eyes slid past me to the license plate. One of them murmured, "Oh, this one's cool," before they moved in closer, already absorbed in Callista's narrative. I slipped past them and out of the gallery. Just beyond the doorway, another cluster of guests stood murmuring in front of a curated wall of framed letters and quotations. I knew what it was before I got closer. Callista's wall of gratitude, her collection of thank yous, letters from mentors, sponsors, clients, and apparently me. I spotted my handwriting instantly, near the center, printed neatly on cream parchment. But something was wrong. The words were familiar, but not exact. Months ago, after a product launch, Eid sent her a private note. Something simple, sincere. It ended with, "Thank you for letting me contribute behind the scenes." The version on this wall now read, "I've learned so much from your strength and leadership." R. No context, no full name, just an initial. A stripped-down, remixed version of my voice reshaped to suit hers. I stood still for a beat too long. That's when I felt her behind me. "Ro," Callista said, voice light. "Everything okay?" I turned slowly. She looked perfectly poised. Lipstick still flawless, heels steady, expression unreadable. But her eyesure eyes were searching mine. "You might want to double-check the attributions in your gallery," I said calmly. "Some of the things you're displaying? They don't belong to you." Her smile wavered. "Barely." A tightening at the corners, a twitch in her jaw. "Ro, this is the place." "Maybe not," I said, my voice soft but unwavering. "But it's the moment." Silence stretched between us. She glanced over her shoulder, but no one was paying attention. We were cocooned in a kind of manufactured privacy. Her party, her guests, her house, but right now, she was standing on ground that wasn't entirely hers. For once, she had no immediate spin, no polished deflection, just the widening space between us 2 feet apart, but continents away. I walked past her, back toward the main hall. My steps were slower now, deliberate. I didn't rush. I wanted her to hear each footfall echo against the marble. I wanted her to feel them. Just before I turned the corner, I stopped. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. "Next time you borrow something from me," I said clearly, "ask." The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was full. I hadn't even made it halfway across the ballroom when I saw him, Tobias Harker. There was no mistaking him. That careful, too smooth walk, the stiff shoulders that always gave away his guilt before his mouth ever did. And those eyes, same green, same guarded flicker, still couldn't hold mine for more than a second. He was standing near the dessert table, champagne in hand, surrounded by people who clearly didn't know the man they were applauding. Investors, socialites, opportunists. He wore his smile like armor, laughing as if the past didn't exist, as if I didn't exist. My chest didn't ache the way it used to. That old heartbreak had long since hardened into something sharper, colder. This wasn't grief. This was recognition. Of betrayal, of cowardice, of theft, dressed up in designer suits and confident lies. Nobody told me he'd be here. Maybe that was the point. I kept my steps slow, measured. A foolish, flickering part of me still hoped he'd look up, that he'd see me and offer some glimmer of decency. But no, he didn't even blink until Callista stepped into his line of sight and into his arms. They hugged. Not polite. Not professional. No hesitation. That hug had history. My stomach sank, but my eyes stayed fixed. Their easy closeness, the way her hand lingered on his shoulder, how his fingers brushed the small of her back, it wasn't the kind of intimacy you built over business meetings. It was older, warmer, secret. That's when I noticed it. His watch. My feet froze. There it was on his wrist, the vintage Omega. Brown leather band. Faint scratch on the lower bezel. The one I used to polish every Sunday when it still sat on Mom's dresser. I had given it to Callista after the funeral. It was a quiet offering, something personal, something sacred. I thought she'd treasure it. I thought she understood what it meant. Now it was on his wrist. He saw me see it. And instead of looking ashamed, he smiled subtle, smug, and raised his wrist slightly, like he was showcasing a trophy. Callista gave it to me, he said, casual as ever. His voice carried just enough for me to hear. Said it belonged to someone who always knew what time it was. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. But inside, something shifted. Something irreversible. Not pain. Not even betrayal. Finality. A door closing that would never open again. I gave a small nod. Turned away. Not far. Just enough to reach the edge of the stage where the event was moving forward, unaware that the ground beneath it had just cracked. The lights dimmed. Callista's heels clicked across the floor, each step echoing louder than the last. She took the stage with her usual charm, eyes warm, voice dipped in honey. "And now," she announced, her gaze sweeping across the crowd, "I'd like to introduce someone who's been an incredible addition to our journey. A visionary, a strategist, a true risk-taker. Please welcome my new partner, Tobias Harker." Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. I didn't move. Tobias stepped up like he was born for it. Smiling, confident. And then, like a dagger in the ribs, he began to tell my story. He talked about struggle, about vision, about a pitch deck that turned the tide. But every detail he spoke, every battle I had, bled through, he gave it to her. He painted Callista as the mastermind, the builder, the believer. Said she bet on herself when no one else did. My ears rang. I didn't feel rage, I felt clarity. Cold, sharp, dangerous. They weren't just cutting me out, they were replacing me. I stood up. No one saw it coming. The applause was still fading when I walked toward the stage. I didn't rush. I didn't tremble. I just moved forward like someone who had nothing left to prove and everything left to say. I reached the microphone as Tobias stepped back, surprised. I looked out over the room, and I spoke. "My name is Rowena Lark," I said. Murmurs rippled. And before that watch was his, it was my mother's. Before that pitch deck changed the game, I wrote every word. And Tobias, I turned to face him. "You and I both know that back then, you didn't have the guts to use it. You borrowed courage. You still are." The room froze. Not with confusion, but with recognition. Faces turned. Whispers rose. Investors frowned. Truth has a way of cutting through even the most expensive lies. I let the silence sit. Just long enough to sting. Then I stepped down. Callista stood, stiff and strained. The mask had cracked. "You've made your point, Ro." I turned, still holding the mic. The buzz faint in the background. "No," I said, eyes steady. "I haven't even started." Then I walked away. The applause never came, But the attention, the kind that couldn't be stolen, was finally mine. There are moments when the air in a room changes before anyone says a word, like the second before a storm hits a charged quiet, heavy and unnatural. That's what it felt like after my moment on stage. No one addressed me outright. No one dared challenge me directly, but I could sense it. The sudden hush in conversations when I got too close. The subtle pivots, too rehearsed smiles, the way people turned away just a little too quickly. I moved through the crowd like I was walking through fog, detached, watching everyone pretend everything was fine. I made my way toward the drinks table, craving something citrusy, something light enough to pretend I didn't feel the undercurrent pulling me under. But before I reached it, a woman blocked my path. Her hair was curled to polished perfection, and her smile too wide, like she practiced it in the mirror. "Rowena, right?" she chirped. The cheer in her tone was artificial, too bright to be genuine. "Callista told me you were the creative mind behind the site. Said you must be really good with Canva." She laughed, loudly, like she thought she was giving me a compliment, like comparing me to a beginner dragging templates around was somehow flattering. That word Canva sliced sharper than she knew, not because I'm above the tool, but because I knew exactly what she meant, that I was just a helper, the girl in the corner moving fonts around, not the visionary, not the founder, just the girl with access to a free design platform. I held her gaze for one beat too long, lips pressed tight in a smile that didn't form. Then, I walked past her without a word. I wouldn't let her get the satisfaction. I ended up in the far gallery, hoping for some breathing room. That's when a hand brushed my arm gently. I turned, expecting another stranger, another sideways jab. Instead, it was Marvin. Older, slouched, weathered in the way people look when they've held secrets too long. He had been Callista's accountant before she phased him out for someone younger, flashier, and more aligned with her brand. He didn't smile, just nodded and reached into his jacket, pulling out a manila envelope creased at the edges, sealed but clearly reused. "I have something you need to see," he said, voice low. Curious and slightly on edge, I stepped into a quiet alcove and broke the seal. Inside was a printed contract. Series A, funding. I flipped through quickly, scanning familiar names, unfamiliar numbers, and then I saw mine. My name, listed clearly as financial guarantor. My signature at the bottom. Only it wasn't mine. It was almost mine. Close enough to pass if someone didn't know my handwriting well. Convincing, careful, but not mine. I stared at it for a long second, feeling the world tilt a little. I never signed this. "I know," Marvin said quietly. "I was told to shred it, months ago. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not after everything." My chest felt hollow. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It wasn't just family tension or jealousy. This was criminal. This was identity theft wrapped in legacy talk and smiles at the buffet. I said nothing for a moment. My hand shook as I folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and looked up. "Thank you," I said simply. "You did the right thing. And now, I will too." The quiet rage in my gut hardened into clarity. No more waiting, no more hoping for people to defend me, no more soft steps. I stepped back into the hall, slipped my phone from my bag, and moved with quiet purpose. I snapped a photo of the watch on Tobias Riston engraved piece my father once promised me. Then the license plate mounted on the gallery wall, a vanity relic from our old headquarters, now bearing only Callista's initials. And finally, a photo of the framed mission statement near the bar, every word plagiarized from my original draft, twisted to erase my name. I uploaded each image to my private drive. Then I backed up every document Marvin had given me, encrypting it and emailing it to a lawyer I trusted from years ago, someone who once told me, "Keep the receipts. One day you'll need them." I wasn't going to war. Not yet. But I was building the arsenal. I stayed another half hour, long enough to make them nervous, long enough to let the whispers circle without giving them anything real. Let them think I was still just the girl with Canva. I drifted near the buffet, silent, watching, listening. A woman I barely knew raised her wine glass in my direction, then looked away just as quickly. People smiled too big, laughed too loudly, but no one came close. And just as I turned to leave, another guest mid-40s, slightly tipsy, approached me with a squint. "Hey," he said, clearly trying to place me. "Weren't you the assistant who helped Callista get started?" There was a pause. A small one. The kind where your whole life feels like it could pivot. I didn't get angry. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, a calm, detached kind of smile that never reached my eyes. "No," I said softly. "I was the sister who gave her everything." Then I stepped forward, heels clicking against the polished floor, and added, "And now, I'm taking some of it back." The ballroom was glowing in a haze of golden light, as if the chandeliers themselves were trying to forgive the sins committed beneath them. Shadows pooled at the corners of the room, while the center radiated warmth and excess, everything Callista had ever wanted people to believe about her life. Dessert carts rolled in like the final float in a showy parade, servers maneuvering around polished heels and satin gowns with trained grace. Callista stood at the center beneath a teardrop chandelier, radiant in borrowed light, glass raised mid-toast. I lingered near the back, barely noticed, just another figure against the textured wallpaper. My fingers twisted a cloth napkin, one I hadn't even realized I'd picked up. It was instinct now, this quiet containment. On the banquet table, a procession of ornate three-tiered cakes gleamed under strings of fairy lights. Each had a placard in curling calligraphy: marketing lead, founding angel, creative strategist, and at the very end set, apart like an afterthought, stood a smaller cake, pale vanilla, laced with pressed violets and rose petals. My cake. I knew every ingredient. I had measured, sifted, and baked it myself 2 nights ago in my apartment in Goleta. I had driven through dawn fog, delivered it myself. No courier, no bakery, just me. But the card in front of it read, "Courtesy of Marcy, Executive Assistant." It was subtle, almost clever. Erasure disguised as delegation. It hit harder than shouting ever could. No one else noticed the breath I lost, or the way my heartbeat stuttered behind my ribs. No one paused their conversation or looked my way. In this room, my silence was expected. My presence, forgettable. I moved toward the stage knot with vengeance, not with fear, but with the kind of resolve that hardens in silence. Each step was steady, rehearsed by 1,000 imagined confrontations that had never come. Callista's voice dripped sugar. To those who stood by me, believed in the journey, and lifted me when I couldn't lift myself, she said, glass raised. And before we end the evening, she continued, let's toast to resilience, both seen and unseen. I arrived at the microphone just as her words trailed off. Our eyes met. Her smile flickered. She hadn't planned for this. I'd like to share something too, I said, my voice calm, unmistakably clear. I didn't ask. I simply took. A few polite claps echoed, unsure. The crowd shifted, murmured, curious, but no one stopped me. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it with a swipe, and held it to the microphone. I tapped play. A recording crackled to life, raw audio, but unmistakable. "Ro!" my father's voice rang out. "Don't let anyone talk you out of your voice. Not even family." Silence fell like a sheet over the room. I let it stretch. Then I spoke. "I baked that cake," I said evenly, pointing to the one at the end. The one with the violets. "I also wrote the pitch deck that secured your applause last quarter. I designed the website you all complimented tonight, and I unknowingly signed the contract that gave her the funding, under my name, under false pretenses." A wave of murmurs rose like a low tide. People turned, some whispered. A few looked down at their drinks. "I gave her my car," I said, voice unwavering. "My weekends. My name. I offered support in ways most people here will never know, and every time I asked for nothing, I was thanked with even less." Callista stood frozen, Her champagne flute lowered an inch, but she didn't interrupt. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage and looked directly at her. My voice softened, not weaker, but more dangerous in its steadiness. "I was invited into your dream," I said, and then, without warning, I was uninvited from its success. There was an audible gasp from someone near the front. A woman shifted subtly away from Callista. Another man put his glass down, unreadable. I nodded once, acknowledging the moment. "I gave you my silence," I continued. "That contract gave you my credit. Tonight, I'm taking both back." I stepped off the stage slowly. I didn't need to rush. Truth doesn't require drama to land hard. Behind me, I could hear her inhale sharply, the breath before a defensive monologue, a curated spin. But before she could form the first syllable, another voice rose, strong, assured, and devastating. "Actually," Tobias said from the crowd, his voice slicing clean through the golden hush, "I think there's something I should add." Heads turned, eyes darted, and suddenly, the room wasn't just watching me. They were watching him. And Callista knew the reckoning had only just begun. The next morning, my apartment was so quiet it felt padded. Outside, the streets of Goleta were washed in that soft golden light you only get after rain. I sat by the window, wrapped in the cardigan my mother used to wear while folding laundry, and let the mug of coffee warm my hands more than my throat. My phone buzzed again, third time since sunrise. I didn't pick it up. The screen kept lighting with notifications, headlines, voicemails, texts from numbers I hadn't saved. I let them come and go like weather. Peace, I was learning, doesn't crash through the door. It doesn't announce itself with applause or validation. Sometimes it just settles, like dust after a storm. I sipped my coffee and opened my laptop. The clip was everywhere now. Someone had filmed my speech at the party. My voice calm, collected played over footage of stunned guests. And my father's message? That part had gone viral. "Don't let anyone talk you out of your voice. Not even family." I closed the tab. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to read the comments to know who I was. There was a message waiting from Tobias. Short, no excuses. "I'm sorry, I saw it too late." I didn't reply. Not because I hadn't wanted him to say it, but because I didn't need him to anymore. Later that day, I met with a lawyer Marvin recommended. He had sent over additional filesmails, versions of contracts. It was more than enough. By the time I left the office, the legal distance between me and Vidal Grace was officially, irrevocably, clean. No lawsuits, no drama. Just clarity. Back at Callistus Villa, I heard they'd taken down the cake display. The wall of praise was under redesign. No public apology, no retraction. But sometimes, justice doesn't need a microphone. It just adjusts the frame. That evening, I pulled out the journal I'd started when I sold the car. I flipped to the first page. I sold my car for her dream. I added a line beneath it, but I kept the map for mine. Later, just before sunset, I drove up the hill to the cemetery. I parked where the grass met the gravel, near the bench I always used to sit on with Dad. I brought the old cassette player with Mize. It still worked, and placed the tape on the gravestone. "Thanks for saying it first," I whispered. I finally caught up. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. As I was walking back to the car, my phone buzzed again. This time, I looked. An email from a nonprofit arts council in Santa Barbara. Subject line, "Let's talk." They'd seen the speech. They wanted me to lead a mentorship program women, post-career pivots, building new stories. I stared at the screen for a long second, then hit reply. "I'd love to, but I won't come quietly this time." I clicked send, and for the first time in what felt like years, I exhaled without flinching. Callista lost control of the story. I just reclaimed mine. That's not revenge, that's survival. Sometimes survival doesn't look like running or hiding. It looks like finally saying your name out loud when no one else would. I spent too long thinking silence made me noble, that patience would be rewarded. But here's what I've learned. If you don't speak up for your place in the story, someone else will rewrite it without you in it. This isn't just about family or business. It's about boundaries, it's about self-respect, and maybe it's about knowing when to stop shrinking to fit someone else's spotlight and start standing in your own. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt erased from your own life? Has someone ever taken your kindness for weakness? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this video hit home, leave a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't speak to you, I still want to know why. Your voice matters here. Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. This channel is about truth, healing, and the kind of quiet strength that grows louder when shared. Until next time, take care of your voice. Hello, my name is Sabrina, and I used to believe family was everything. But that was before the night my dad screamed, "Pack your things, leave tonight," when I begged him for school fees. My brother smirked, calling me a failure, and my mom, she just looked away. It was in that moment I realized I'd been living a lie they'd built to keep me small. I was the one who sacrificed everything for them, and yet, when I needed them the most, they cut me out, left me to fend for myself. But I didn't go quietly. I took action, cutting every bill, taking control, and walking away from the family who made me feel invisible. But here's the real question. Can you ever truly escape the ties that bind you to the people who raised you? What happens when you finally decide to fight back? It was the same old scene in the kitchen, just like any other night. The smell of simmering stew lingered in the air, too familiar to bring any sense of comfort. The faint creak of the aging floorboards under my feet echoed in the silent house as I stirred the pot. My mother, Vera, stood beside me, peeling potatoes, her movements mechanical. The silence between us was thick, like the air that hung over us. She didn't speak unless she had to, and even then, it was always brief, like she was saving words for something more important. I watched her face, trying to see if there was any spark, any trace of warmth in her eyes, but there was nothing. Not today. I sighed inwardly, trying not to let the frustration show. The front door creaked open, and I barely noticed Zoran's arrival. He always entered with that arrogant confidence that somehow managed to fill the room even before he said a word. His heavy footsteps echoed, and the subtle shift in the air signaled his presence. I could hear my mother's voice greeting him as if he were royalty, and I wondered, not for the first time, when I stopped feeling like I belonged here. "Dinner's almost ready," I muttered, barely looking at him. He waved me off, too focused on his phone, the perfect embodiment of someone who knew they had it all, and yet I could already feel the familiar sting of being invisible. Zoran settled at the table, a casual air about him, like he was too good for this house, too good for any of us. My dad, Corbin, came in shortly after, a loud laugh filling the room. He clapped Zoran on the back, his deep voice filling the kitchen with pride. "You're gonna do big things, kid," my dad said, taking his place at the head of the table. "I can see it. You've got that drive." I swallowed a bitter taste, my fingers tightening around the spoon I was holding. It was never for me, was it? The praise, the attention. It was always for Zoran. I smiled and kept my thoughts to myself, just like always. Dinner began, and as usual, the conversation flowed, but it was always about Zoran's successes. My father would talk about his business deals, praising Zoran for every little accomplishment. He didn't even look my way, even though I had been the one holding the family together for years. My mind wandered to all the late nights, all the things I had done to keep them afloat, but no one seemed to notice. I glanced over at my daughter, Narina. She was sitting quietly, her small frame hunched over her plate. She was only 8, but she had already learned to stay out of the way, to keep quiet when the adults talked. It broke my heart a little more each time I saw her absorb the tension in the room. My mother, Vera, didn't even try to make eye contact with me. Instead, she focused on cutting her vegetables. Her silence was suffocating, a constant reminder that I wasn't even worth speaking to. I cleared my throat, hesitating for a moment. The words felt like they weighed a ton, but I knew I had to say them. This was the moment. I wasn't sure what I expected, but the need for help was becoming too much to hide. "Dad? Mom? I need some help with Narina's school fees." I said, my voice almost a whisper, barely daring to look up. The room fell silent. The only sound was the clink of silverware against plates. Everyone froze, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stretch. This was it. I held my breath, hoping, praying, that maybe, just maybe, this time, they would listen. Corbin, my father, was the first to break the silence. He slammed his fork down onto the plate, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Again? He growled, his voice rising. What have you ever done that's worth investing in? All you've ever done is play the martyr. My heart sank. I had worked so hard. I had done everything for them, but it didn't matter. It would never be enough. Vera let out a sigh, keeping her eyes on her plate. Zoran didn't even look up. He just smirked, his lips curling in that all-knowing way that made me want to scream. Failure, he muttered, barely audible, but enough for everyone to hear. Narina's small fingers tightened around mine. Her little eyes were wide, filled with confusion and fear. She had never seen her family like this before. I could feel the weight of her fear pressing down on me, but I swallowed it down, forcing a calm face. I looked up, meeting my father's gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, no compassion. He just looked at me like I was a problem he didn't want to deal with. Pack your things, leave tonight, Corbin spat, his voice laced with venom. It was as if the room had stopped breathing. The weight of his words hit me, harder than I expected. The years of silence, of doing everything for them, had come to this. I was nothing more than a burden to them. The spoon I had been holding clattered against the table, the sound sharp and final. Narina gasped, the sound breaking through the heavy silence. I felt my heart race, but I stayed frozen in place, my face burning, but my expression calm. I didn't want them to see me break. Not now. Not ever again. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, to scream, but I stayed still. I knew this was it. This was the moment I had been dreading, but also the moment I needed to move on from this family. I glanced at my daughter, who was still gripping my hand. Her small face was pale, her eyes filled with confusion. I squeezed her hand tighter, my grip steadying both of us. I thought about the years, the sacrifices, the late nights spent working, keeping everything together for them. I thought about all the times I had been ignored, all the times I had kept quiet, trying to avoid confrontation, trying to keep peace. But not anymore. Not tonight. I stood slowly, taking one last look at the family that had never once considered me a priority. I had done everything for them, and now I was walking away. Come on, Narina, I said softly, my voice calm but firm. I didn't look back as I walked toward the door. And as I walked past that dinner table, I knew I'd never return to it again. The door shut behind me with a hollow final click. Narina's small hand tightened in mine, and I could feel the tiny tremors in her fingers. I hadn't said anything, but my heart was beating too fast, too loud in my chest. Each step I took felt like it was carrying me farther away from the life I had known for so long. The life where I had sacrificed everything to make them proud. But now it was over. I could still hear the echoes of my father's command. Pack your things. Leave tonight. Those words, so cold, so final, had shaken me to my core. As the door closed behind me, it was like the house itself had swallowed me whole, leaving nothing but the empty silence that I would never be able to erase from my mind. I pulled Narina closer, my voice quiet, barely a whisper. Let's go, honey. Her eyes were wide, but she said nothing. The soft shuffle of our footsteps was the only sound as we walked toward the car. The chill of the night air hit my face, sharp and biting. The world outside felt so different from the house we had just left. There, everything had been suffocating. Every glance, every word weighed down by years of silence and resentment. But here, in the open air, it felt like I could finally breathe. I could feel the weight of the night pressing on my shoulders, but there was no turning back. I had to keep moving forward, even if I didn't yet know where that path would take me. Narina's small body was close to mine, her head barely reaching my shoulder as we walked. She was so quiet, and it broke me. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, but I couldn't make her any promises. Not yet, not when I wasn't sure I could even promise that to myself. When we reached the car, I hesitated for a second. The door seemed to be mocking me with its stillness, just like the house behind me. I opened it, pulling Narina inside. The engine hummed to life under my fingertips, the sound somehow comforting, even though everything else felt like it was falling apart. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house was behind me now, but the memories, the years of trying to please them, still lingered in the rearview, just like the house that would never be home to me again. But as I pulled away, a strange sense of relief began to settle in. My father's words were still fresh in my mind, echoing in the pit of my stomach. Failure. He had said it so simply, with that cold, bitter tone. I had worked so hard for them, for him, but it was never enough. Failure. The word bounced around in my head, getting louder with every mile that passed. I could feel the sting of it, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. I had tried so damn hard, given everything I had, and for what? For them to see me as a disappointment? To be nothing more than a burden? I had spent my entire life trying to make them proud, to be someone they could talk about with pride, but all I had earned was a seat at the table, with the words failure stamped across it. I had tried to be the good daughter, the good mother, the good person, but none of that mattered. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. I don't need their approval, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. It was a small declaration, a whisper in the wind, but it carried weight, a weight that felt heavy, but also freeing, because in that moment I realized that I didn't need to keep bending myself to fit their mold. I didn't need to beg for their love. It was time to stand on my own. My thoughts swirled, a mess of doubt, anger, and exhaustion. I thought of the years I had spent quietly suffering, trying to prove myself, trying to get them to see me as more than just the daughter who could never get it right. But now, as I drove further and further away from the house, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I didn't need them to see me at all. I glanced over at Narina, her small face still solemn. She had always been the quiet one, the one who felt things deeply but never spoke up. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "Are you okay, sweetie?" I asked. She nodded, her lips trembling, but she didn't speak. I didn't know what to say to make her feel better. Hell, I didn't know how to make myself feel better. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to keep moving forward. For her. For me. We drove for what felt like hours, the quiet stretching between us. The night outside the car window was dark, and the headlights cut through it like a beacon, guiding us towards something unknown. But it wasn't the unknown that scared me. It was the knowledge that I had been living in a house of lies for so long, and now I was free from it, free but terrified. I pulled into a small gas station a few miles out of town, the lights flickering overhead. I needed to stop for a moment. I parked the car and sat there for a few minutes, the engine still running, the hum filling the air. My hands rested on the steering wheel, my heart still pounding in my chest. What now? I thought. What do I do now? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as I looked out the window, watching the dark stretch ahead. I couldn't answer it yet. I didn't know what the next step was. But for the first time in years, I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me what to do. I was doing it on my own. With one last deep breath, I turned off the engine. Narina stirred in the seat next to me, and I looked over at her. Her eyes met mine, and there was a flicker of something in them. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't confusion. It was something else. Something like hope. I got out of the car and opened Narina's door. Together, we stepped out into the cold night, leaving the house, the lies, and everything else behind. I didn't know where we were going, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally heading in the right direction. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't let this defeat me. I had to rise. I couldn't let it define me, what they said, what they did. For so long, I'd bent to their will, trying to stay small, trying to fit into the life they expected of me. I thought if I just tried harder, did more, maybe then they'd see me. Maybe then they'd realize I wasn't just the failure they made me out to be. But now, in this tiny apartment, with Narina by my side, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. We were settled here. Or at least, as settled as you can be in a cramped apartment where the walls feel like they're closing in, the space too small to stretch, too small for dreams. It wasn't much, but it was ours. No more suffocating silence. No more looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next blow would come. As I stared at the worn couch, the unpacked boxes scattered around, the reality of it all sunk in. This was it. This was what I had chosen. A life without them. A life of my own. Narina sat at the small table, coloring quietly, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't say much, but I could tell she was trying to make sense of everything, just like I was. We both were. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this conflicted. Part of me still longed for the comfort of family, the familiarity of home, even if it was a home I'd spent my whole life trying to belong to. But another part of me, that part was angry. Angry at myself for letting them have so much control, angry at them for making me feel so small for so long. I pulled my phone from my purse, the familiar screen lighting up in my hands. My finger hovered over the app, my bank account. I could still hear my father's voice in my head, the cruel words he'd said to me over dinner. Failure. His voice had been a slap, a final blow that had shattered any hope I had left of ever being good enough in his eyes. The bitterness in his tone echoed in my ears as I opened the bank's app. The screen loaded, and the balance showed the reality of everything I'd been doing for years. Utilities, mortgage, TV subscriptions. It had always been me. I'd paid their bills, sent them money when they asked, never questioning it. I thought I was just doing my part as a daughter, as a mother. But now, as I saw it all laid out, it hit me. All this time, I wasn't helping them out of love or duty. I was being controlled. They had power over me, not because they cared about me, but because they needed me. The room seemed to close in around me. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. I could feel the weight of the years pressing down on my chest, all the times I had paid without question, all the times I had bent over backward to make sure they were comfortable, to make sure they had everything they wanted. I had kept my head down, my mouth shut, and for what? To be told that I was a failure, to be dismissed like I didn't matter? I wasn't going to do it anymore. My hand shook as I opened the utilities app. I tapped the electricity bill. I hovered over the cancel button, a bead of sweat forming at the back of my neck. For a brief second, I hesitated. Was this the right thing to do? Was I really going to sever all ties with them like this? But then, I remembered my mother's face, her cold eyes, the way she had looked away when I asked for help. She never once considered me worthy of respect. Not once. With a deep breath, I pressed the button. The cancellation was final. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was something deeper. It was power. I moved on to the next bill. The water bill. Then the cable bill. Each one I canceled felt like a small victory, like I was slowly reclaiming something that had been taken from me without my consent. By the time I finished, my hands were trembling, but my chest felt lighter. I stared at the phone for a moment, the silence between me and Narina almost deafening. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. They'd never had control over me. I had given it to them. The realization hit me hard, but it also brought with it a sense of clarity. All these years, I had let them dictate my life, my actions, my worth. I had let their approval be the driving force behind everything I did, but not anymore. I placed the phone down and looked at Narina, who was still coloring, her small fingers steady with each stroke of the crayon. A simple moment, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like a turning point. I was finally free. I wasn't bound to their expectations anymore. I wasn't tied to the weight of their disapproval. I was standing on my own, and that thought alone made me feel stronger than I had in years. Narina looked up at me, sensing the change, her eyes soft and uncertain, but hopeful. I smiled at her, the weight of the world momentarily lifted off my shoulders. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, though I didn't quite know if that was true, but I had to believe it. I had to make myself believe it for her. I stood up, moving toward the small window of our apartment, peering out into the darkening street. The world outside felt so different now, so much bigger, and yet, for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt like I had a future, one that was mine to shape. And whatever came next, I would face it head on. I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo the past. But I could move forward. I could take control of my life, no matter what it took. The phone buzzed on the table, a notification flashing on the screen, another reminder of the world I had left behind. But I wasn't looking back anymore. I had made my choice. I walked back to the couch and sat down beside Narina, who had returned to her coloring. She looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something I hadn't seen in her eyes for years. Hope. The silence that greeted me in the morning felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating me. The apartment, though small and cluttered, should have felt like a refuge. But instead, it only reminded me of how far I had fallen. Narina was still asleep in her room, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I could hear the distant hum of cars outside, a stark contrast to the stillness inside. I stood in front of the kitchen counter, my eyes landing on the unpaid rent notice. The numbers blurred for a moment, a reminder of what I was up against. I had no choice but to keep moving forward, even if the weight of financial insecurity pressed harder against me with every passing day. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the courage to face the reality of it all. This apartment, this space that I was now supposed to call home, was a far cry from the house I had grown up in, the one that I thought would always be there, providing comfort and support. But now, that house felt like a distant dream, something I could never go back to, no matter how much I longed for it. The phone on the counter vibrated, jolting me out of my thoughts, a string of missed calls and texts. My heart sank when I saw the names: Vera, Corbin, Zoran. Their messages flashed across the screen. "Call us, Sabrina. This isn't you. We're sorry. We need to talk." I couldn't bring myself to answer. I knew that if I did, it would all start again. The manipulation, the lies, the feeling of being less than. I had spent so many years trying to earn their approval, trying to be what they wanted me to be, and for what? To be dismissed? To be ignored? I stared at the screen for a moment longer, a part of me fighting the urge to respond. I wanted to pick up the phone, hear their voices, make them explain, make them apologize, but I knew that if I answered, I would be giving them the power once more. So, I ignored the calls. I deleted the messages. It felt strange, liberating, almost. I'd never done this before. Every time they'd called in the past, I'd been there, ready to help, to fix things. But now, for the first time, I wasn't answering. And it felt right, like I was finally taking back control. I leaned against the counter, the weight of the moment settling in. I wasn't just ignoring them, I was walking away, finally cutting the strings that had bound me to them for so long. But the emptiness lingered. The silence in the apartment felt louder now, like a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. I couldn't help but think back to when I was a little girl, always second to Zoran, always in the shadow of my brother, never good enough, never seen. I remembered the family gatherings, where I would work tirelessly to make everything perfect, but when it came time for recognition, I was overlooked. I could still see my mother's face, her cold indifference. She never once saw me for who I was, only for what I could do for her. The memory hit me hard, like a punch to the stomach. That was the moment I had been fighting against my whole life. I had been fighting for their approval, for their love. But it was never about love. It was about control. I had been a tool for them to use, and when they no longer had any use for me, they cast me aside. I stood up straight, a fire igniting in me. I was done. No more trying to be what they wanted. No more asking for their help, their approval. I turned to look at Narina, who had finally woken up and was sitting quietly on the couch, her crayons scattered in front of her. She looked at me with those big, innocent eyes, and I felt a surge of protectiveness wash over me. I had been fighting for her all along, but now, I realized, I was fighting for myself too. I walked to the door, taking one last look around the apartment. It wasn't much, but it was ours. It was a start, a fresh beginning. I had spent so many years letting my family dictate my life, my choices, but no more. I was done letting them hold power over me. The only power I needed now was my own. I walked to my phone, picked it up, and stared at it for a long moment. Then, with a sense of finality, I dialed the number I promised myself I would never call again. The phone rang. Each ring felt like a lifetime. I had no idea what I was going to say when they picked up. But I knew I had to say something. I couldn't let this go on any longer. The phone clicked, and I heard her voice. Vera. Sabrina, please, she said, her voice shaky. We need to talk. For a second, I almost caved. But then I remembered what had brought me to this moment. The years of silence, the years of bending to their will, of sacrificing my own happiness for theirs. I'm done, Mom, I said, the words coming out stronger than I thought they would. I can't keep doing this. I'm not your pawn anymore. I'm done. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her processing my words, and for the first time, I felt no need to explain myself. She didn't deserve an explanation. I'll be fine, I said, my voice steady. You'll have to figure it out without me. I hung up the phone, and for the first time, I felt free. I stared at the phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over the screen as I processed the last few days. The silence, the fear, the weight of all that had happened since I left. It felt like a 1,000-pound weight on my chest, but it also felt oddly freeing. I had taken control. I was done playing the role of the obedient daughter, the one who always had to fix everything, but the next step, the final confrontation, was coming. Narina was in the corner, quietly drawing as she always did. She was so calm, so innocent, and yet everything I was doing was for her. Everything was for her safety, her future, her ability to grow up without the burden of the manipulations I had carried for far too long. I had to be strong for her. I had to break free, for both of us. My phone buzzed again, and I looked down. It was Zoran. I felt the anger rise in me almost immediately. Zoran, my brother, the one who had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But I was done being in his shadow. I was done being overshadowed by his success, his charm, his manipulations. With a deep breath, I pressed accept. His smug voice came through the speaker. Sabrina, I know things are a little crazy right now, but we need to talk. Just hear me out. I wasn't going to let him sweet-talk me. No, Zoran, I said, my voice steady. You have no idea what you've done. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, probably trying to compose himself. Look, I get it. You're upset, he said with a forced chuckle. But this isn't like you. I know Mom and Dad pushed you, but we're family. This isn't the way to handle things. I could hear the insecurity in his voice, the way he tried to mask it with his usual arrogance. It made me sick. No, I said again, my voice unwavering. This is exactly the way I need to handle things. You're the one who has no idea what you've done. All these years you've used Mom and Dad, and I've been right there, cleaning up the mess you've left behind. And what do I get in return? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. His silence was telling. He couldn't argue with that. It was true. He had always been the favored one, the one who was celebrated, while I was left to do the dirty work. I didn't give him a chance to respond. I hung up the phone. That was the last time I was going to let him manipulate me with his sweet talk. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Corbin, my father. The man who had never once acknowledged all the sacrifices I had made. The man who had always seen me as nothing more than a tool, something to be used when it was convenient, discarded when it wasn't. I stared at the phone, hesitation creeping in. I had to answer. I had to face him, once and for all. With a sigh, I pressed accept, and his cold voice immediately hit my ears. This has gone too far, Sabrina, Corbin said, his tone ice cold. You don't belong out there. Come back and let's fix this. You're making a huge mistake. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't. I had been manipulated by him for too long. No, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "I've been fixing things for you my whole life. Now it's your turn to fix your own mistakes." He was silent for a moment, clearly taken aback by my response. I wasn't the little girl he could control anymore. I was an adult. I was stronger than that now. "Do you know what you've done?" I continued. "All these years, I've been supporting you, paying bills, keeping everything afloat. And for what? For nothing. For your constant expectations. For your belief that I'm just supposed to take care of things. But I'm done." Corbin's voice dropped, low and menacing. "You don't want to do this, Sabrina. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I shot back. "And if you want my help, you'll have to earn it. But I won't come back unless I see real change. I won't come back unless you change." I hung up before he could say anything else. The finality of it settled in me like a rock sinking into the deepest part of the ocean. I was done, and there was no going back. I stood there for a moment, looking at the phone in my hand. The silence in the apartment was deafening. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't the silence of submission. It was the silence of freedom. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I wasn't waiting for their permission. Narina was still sitting in the corner, drawing peacefully. She looked up at me as if she could sense the shift, as if she knew that this was the turning point for both of us. I smiled at her, the first real smile I had in a long time. "We're going to be all right, sweetheart," I whispered, even though part of me still felt the sting of everything I had lost. But in that moment, I realized something. I had lost nothing. I had gained everything. This was the beginning of something new. A new life, free from the weight of their expectations, free from the manipulation, free from the suffocating silence that had held me back for so long. But little did I know, they wouldn't just let me go that easily. The phone's persistent buzzing echoed in the quiet apartment, filling the space that had once been so chaotic, so full of tension, but now seemed to be too still, too peaceful. Narina was sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring. The sound of her crayon on the paper was the only noise in the room. I watched her, my heart heavy with the weight of the decisions I had made. I'd never imagined it would come to this. But now that it had, I felt strangely liberated. I had no place to go back to. The family I had fought so hard to hold together had turned on me, and yet here I was, standing on my own for the first time in my life. The phone rang again, and my fingers hesitated over the screen. It was Zoran, my brother. I stared at the name, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear what he had to say, but I already knew. He wasn't calling to make things right. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to fix things on his terms, to try and manipulate me into coming back. I wasn't going to let him do that again. I let the phone ring. A few seconds passed, and then the vibration stopped. But before I could relax, another text came in. This time, it was from my mother. "We didn't raise you to be like this. Your actions are causing irreparable damage to the family. You're better than this, Sabrina. Come home." The words stung more than I expected. I wasn't just letting go of my family, I was letting go of a lifetime of lies. All these years of doing what they wanted, sacrificing my own happiness, and for what? To be manipulated, used, tossed aside the moment I stopped playing the part they expected of me. I stared at the message for a moment longer, my chest tightening. There was no going back now. But something inside me shifted. The anger, the resentment, it was all boiling up now. They had no right to guilt-trip me, to tell me I was destroying the family when they were the ones who had been using me. As I put the phone down, the weight of my own anger began to crystallize. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about me breaking free from their control. This was about me standing up for what was right, about finally being seen for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. The phone buzzed again, louder this time. I picked it up, expecting it to be more of the same. But when I saw the name on the screen, I felt a sickening realization crawl over me. It was my father, Corbin, The man who had spent my entire life treating me like an afterthought. The man who had never seen me as anything more than a pawn in his game. I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but I knew better. If I was going to be free, I had to face him. I had to face all of them. I swiped the phone open and answered. "Sabrina?" His voice came through, cold and detached. "We need to talk." I stood up, walking slowly around the small apartment, trying to steady my nerves. "What's there to talk about?" I asked, my voice steady, but my heart was pounding in my chest. "You know this has gone too far," Corbin continued, his tone laced with frustration. "You don't belong out there. You're making a mistake. You need to come back and let's fix this." The words felt like a slap in the face. He was trying to manipulate me again, trying to convince me to come back under his control. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't going to play along. "I've been fixing things for you my whole life," I said, the words coming out faster than I intended. "Now it's your turn. I've done enough. I'm done." There was a moment of silence, but I could feel the tension building between us, like a storm about to break. Corbin's voice hardened. "This isn't over, Sabrina. You've crossed a line. You don't just walk away from your family like this." "Why didn't you care about me before?" I asked, my voice shaking with fury. "Why didn't you ever appreciate everything I did for you? I gave up my life for you, for Mom, for everything you wanted. And for what? So you could use me and throw me away the moment I stopped being useful? I'm done." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. He didn't know how to respond to that, but I wasn't finished yet. "I've been supporting you all these years, and you never once acknowledged it. You never once said thank you. I'm not your servant, Corbin. I'm not your punching bag anymore. You want my help? You're going to have to earn it. And I'm not coming back until I see a real change." There was silence on the line. I could almost hear his mind racing, trying to process what I had just said, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. When I hung up, for the first time in my life, I hung up on my father. I looked at Narina, who was still sitting on the floor, drawing, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. I smiled at her, the weight in my chest easing just a little. This was it. This was the moment. I had finally taken control of my life. But as I sat there, the phone buzzed once more. This time, it was Zoran. I didn't even want to look at it. I was done. I didn't need to hear his voice anymore. I didn't need his apologies or his empty words. But before I could put the phone down, a text came through. A public post. It was from Zoran. "Failed at life, and now she's gone too far," it read. I felt the anger rise within me. He was doing it again. They were using their power, their control, to try and humiliate me, to try and break me, but I wasn't going to let them. Not this time. I looked at the phone, my hands shaking with rage. The family was playing their dirty game of control. But I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. I was making my own rules now. I grabbed my laptop and opened it up. I had a plan, a way to take back my power once and for all. I opened my email and began typing, not in anger, but in dignity. I wasn't going to let them get away with it anymore. I was going to reveal the truth. Everything I had done for them, every bill I had paid, every sacrifice I had made. I attached the receipts, the bills, the financial records, everything. It was time they knew the truth. I hit send, and for the first time, I felt a sense of relief. But I knew this was just the beginning. The storm was only starting. Sitting in the dimly lit apartment, Narina curled up on the couch, sound asleep. I felt a strange sense of emptiness in the silence that filled the room. The small, cozy space that had become my refuge after everything had changed now felt suffocating in its stillness. It was almost like I could hear the weight of the decisions I had made hanging in the air. My phone buzzed again, breaking the quiet. I reached for it without thinking, my pulse quickening as I saw the name on the screen. It was Corbin. I swiped to answer, bracing myself. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with the cold detachment I felt. "Sabrina," his voice came through, that familiar mixture of coldness and authority. "You've made your point, but now you'll face the consequences." My stomach tightened at his words. There it was. The reality I had been avoiding. The reality of what I had done. This wasn't just a battle about me finding myself, about breaking free. This was war. The consequences were already unfolding. And I had to face them head on, but I wasn't backing down now. I could feel my heartbeat quicken as the anger inside me began to build, the intensity of it pushing everything else aside. "You've never cared about me," I replied, my voice low but firm. "This isn't about me making a mistake. This is about me finally choosing to stop fixing everything for you and making my own life." There was a long pause, a heavy silence that seemed to stretch for miles. I could feel him on the other end of the line, calculating his next move. "You need to come home, Sabrina," he said, his tone dripping with control. "We'll sort this out, face to face." "You're making a mistake." "I've made my decision," I shot back, the words slipping out with a fierceness I hadn't known I had. "It's your turn to change, not mine." Without giving him a chance to respond, I ended the call. The buzzing of the phone continued in the background, but I didn't care anymore. The silence that followed felt almost comforting, though I knew it wouldn't last. But before I could settle into the quiet, another text message appeared on my screen. This time, it was from Zoran. "You've gone too far now. You'll regret this," it read, followed by a link to a social media post. I opened it, my eyes scanning the words. It was a public post from Zoran, mocking me. "Failed at life, and now she's gone too far." The message was blunt, cruel, and meant to humiliate me in front of everyone. I felt a rush of heat in my chest, the blood pounding in my ears. Anger surged, and I could feel the pressure building inside of me. But this time, it wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something more powerful. It was clarity. It was the realization that I had nothing left to lose. They had already taken everything from me, and now they were trying to strip away my dignity. I couldn't let them do that. I wasn't going to let them win. I glanced over at Narina, still asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. She was the reason I'd fought so hard to break free from them, the reason I'd endured years of manipulation and abuse. The thought of her made me more determined than ever to take back control. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for her, too. I felt my phone buzz again. This time, it was from my mother, Vera. The message was brief, but the weight of it hit me like a punch to the stomach. "You don't know what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart, Sabrina. Come home." I squeezed my eyes shut, pushing back the wave of anger threatening to overwhelm me. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't let them manipulate me into submission again. I opened my email and stared at the draft I had written earlier. The truth had been slowly bubbling to the surface for days, and now it was time to let it spill. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative. I wasn't going to be the villain in their story anymore. It was time to set the record straight. I began typing, my fingers moving quickly across the keys. "I know what you've all done," I wrote. "I've spent years paying your bills, taking care of things while you ignored me, neglected me, used me. I've supported you, kept you comfortable, but you never once acknowledged it. Now I'm done." I attached the receipts, the bills, the financial transactions. Everything I had done for them, everything they had taken for granted, was right there in front of them. I hit send, and the email was out there, public, undeniable. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But that relief was quickly replaced by a knot of tension in my stomach. The storm had only just begun. My phone rang again, and I knew who it was before I even looked. It was Corbin again. I almost didn't pick it up. I didn't want to hear his voice, his manipulations, his empty promises. But I did. I couldn't stop myself. "Sabrina," he said, his voice cold and flat. "What have you done?" "I've done what I should have done a long time ago," I replied, my voice steady, but laced with the anger I'd been holding inside for years. "I've taken control of my own life. You won't use me anymore." He scoffed on the other end of the line. "This is going too far. You've made a mistake you'll regret. You're ruining this family." I paused, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. The kind of power that comes from telling the truth, from standing up for yourself. "I'm not ruining anything," I said, my voice stronger than ever. "I'm saving myself." You're the one who's ruined everything." Before he could say anything else, I ended the call again, pressing the phone to my chest. It felt like a weight had been lifted off of me. I knew they wouldn't let me go that easily. They would fight back. They would retaliate. But for the first time in my life, I was ready. And as I sat there, staring at the phone in my hands, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The battle wasn't over yet, but I had finally taken control. I had made my move. I stared at the phone in my hand as the ringing echoed in the small apartment. Narina was still asleep on the couch, the soft rhythm of her breathing filling the silence. The holidays were supposed to be different, or at least that's what I tried to convince myself. The air was thick with the tension that had built in the days since the fallout. Christmas was approaching, but I couldn't bring myself to care about the festivities or the usual celebration. This year, it wasn't about gifts or gathering around a table. It was about decisions I'd made and the next steps to take. The phone rang again, pulling me from my thoughts. I saw Corbin's name flash across the screen. My stomach dropped, and I hesitated for a moment. His calls had become a daily, almost sickening routine, each one another attempt to manipulate and regain control. But today felt different. Today, I had a decision to make. I swiped to answer, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Sabrina," Corbin's voice came through, colder than I had ever heard it. "We need to meet. We need to fix this. You've made your point, but this has gone too far." I didn't hesitate. I wasn't running anymore. "I've made my decision, Corbin. You're not getting me back into that life. I'm not coming home." There was a long, heavy silence. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head as he tried to regain control. "You're making a mistake. You don't know what you're doing." I took a deep breath, refusing to back down. "No, you don't know what you've done. But I'm done fixing your mistakes. I'm done fixing everything for you." "I'm your father," he snapped. "You don't get to make these decisions alone. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than this whole thing you've created." For a moment, I thought about hanging up, about cutting off the conversation completely. But something inside me pushed back. "I've been fixing this family for years. I'm done doing it. And I'm not coming back unless you change." The line was quiet for a beat, and then I heard him speak again, his voice low and filled with frustration. "You're tearing this family apart, Sabrina. You've gone too far this time." I almost laughed, but the sound died in my throat. "You tore it apart years ago," I said softly. "You just didn't care enough to see it." With that, I hung up the phone, a weight lifting from my chest as I did. But the relief was short-lived. The repercussions of my decision were just beginning. The phone buzzed in my hand again, and I saw another message pop up. This time, it was from Zoran. His words stung like a slap in the face. "You're making a huge mistake, Sabrina," the text read. "You failed us. You failed this family." The anger that had simmered just below the surface began to bubble up again. How dare he? How dare they make me the villain in this story, when I had been the one supporting them all along? The texts kept coming, each one more cutting than the last. "You're ruining everything," my mother's message read. "I don't know who you are anymore." I set the phone down with trembling hands. The shame they were trying to heap on me didn't feel like shame anymore. It felt like fuel. They had never seen me like this, and they would never expect what came next. I walked over to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. The weight of it all pressed down on me, but it wasn't a burden anymore. It was clarity. I had made my choice. They had crossed a line, and now I was standing my ground. The truth had already been set in motion. My email to my family was sent. The receipts, the bills, the documentation, everything I had done for them, all laid bare. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was forcing them to see the truth. But as the weight of their reactions began to hit me, a voice in my head reminded me of something that had always been true. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Narina. She was the reason I had fought so hard to change my life. She was the reason I had spent years silently supporting them while they neglected me. She was the one who had never asked for any of this chaos. And she was the one who deserved more. I turned from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I had made it this far. There was no turning back. I checked my phone again. Another message from Corbin. "You've crossed the line. This isn't over." I didn't respond. The next few days passed in a blur of angry messages, social media posts from my family, and whispers from neighbors. They tried to turn the entire town against me. I could hear the rumors swirling as I passed by people at the grocery store. Some didn't even try to hide their whispers. Others gave me pitying looks. It was as though my entire world had been turned upside down, but I stood firm. I was no longer the quiet, obedient daughter. I was no longer the one who always cleaned up their mess. I was done. But even as I stood firm, the weight of my decisions kept pressing on me. They hadn't just humiliated me publicly, they had hurt me in ways that ran deeper than I had ever expected. And yet, as the days dragged on, I began to realize that my anger was only making me stronger. I had nothing left to lose. The next call came on a cold December evening. It was from my father again. I was prepared for this. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them control me anymore. As I stared at the phone, the finality of my decision hit me. There was no turning back now. There was only forward. I picked up the phone. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, casting a soft glow across the small apartment. The holiday season had arrived, but it felt like a world away from the chaos I'd just left behind. It was early January now, and things had settled into a new, quieter routine. I looked over at Narina, asleep on the couch, her peaceful expression a reminder of everything I was fighting for. She was my reason for everything. As I moved around the apartment, tidying up, I couldn't help but think about how far we'd come in just a few months. There were days when I wondered if I had done the right thing, if I had made the right choice by cutting ties with my family. But the weight I carried had lessened with every passing day. The pressure I had lived under for years, the expectations placed on me, had been lifted. I was working multiple jobs now, but it didn't feel as suffocating. I wasn't under the constant shadow of my family's needs. I wasn't worried about how to pay the bills for them, how to make them proud. My mind was clear, and for the first time in a long time, I was beginning to feel peace. I watched as Narina woke up, rubbing her eyes sleepily. She was doing well in school, thriving in an environment where she felt supported, not just by me, but by the new friends she'd made in our new life. I could see the spark in her eyes, the joy of being free from the expectations that had once held both of us captive. It wasn't easy, of course. There were still days when the weight of everything felt like too much, when the loneliness crept in. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to my parents, trying to show them that I was worth their love, that I forgot what it felt like to be my own person, to be free. But now, there were moments of calm, moments when I could simply breathe and not have to worry about anyone else's approval. It was the middle of the afternoon when the call came. My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me from my thoughts. It was from Narina's school. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was about some assignment or school event I had forgotten. I picked up the phone, my heart thudding in my chest. "Hello?" I answered, my voice steady. "Hi, is this Sabrina?" the voice on the other end asked. "This is Mrs. Green from Narina's school. I have some wonderful news for you." My breath caught. "What is it?" I asked, my hands suddenly trembling. "We are pleased to inform you that Narina has been awarded a scholarship for next year," Mrs. Green continued. "She's shown exceptional progress and has been selected to receive financial aid for her next steps." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I sank onto the chair beside me. I pressed the phone to my ear, hearing nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "This means everything to me." "It's well-deserved," Mrs. Green said warmly. "Narina is a bright student, and we're so happy to be able to support her in her academic journey." I hung up the phone, staring at it in disbelief. I hadn't expected this. It was more than just a scholarship. It was proof that all the sacrifices I'd made had been worth it. Narina would have opportunities that I had never been given. She would have a future that was hers to shape, not one defined by the control of others. Narina walked over to me, sensing my emotion. I pulled her into my arms, hugging her tight. "Mom?" she asked softly. "What's wrong?" I pulled back, smiling through the tears. You did it, baby, I whispered. You earned a scholarship. You're going to go far. She blinked in surprise, then grinned, her face lighting up with joy. Really? Really, I said, my voice filled with pride. You've worked so hard, and now it's paying off. She hugged me again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything was going to be okay. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, I received another call. This time, it was from Corbin. My stomach tightened at the sound of his name on the screen. It had been weeks since I had heard from him, and I wasn't sure I was ready for this. But I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? Sabrina, his voice came through, strained. We've made mistakes. I've made mistakes. You were always the one who held everything together, and now I see that I should have seen it before. His apology wasn't a surprise, but the way he said it felt empty, like he was trying to justify his actions, to shift the blame. You were always the one who could handle everything, Sabrina, he continued. I didn't want to admit I needed you, but now, it's too late. I stayed quiet for a moment, processing his words. It was the same thing he always said. He needed me, he depended on me. But it was never about love. It was always about control. I've already moved on, Corbin, I said, my voice firm. I've built a new life for myself and Narina. I can't keep trying to fix what's broken when you're not willing to do the same. His response was defensive, like always. You don't get it, do you? This whole thing, the family falling apart, it's all on you now. You're the one who made this decision. You're the one who destroyed us. The anger bubbled up inside me, but I didn't give in. No, Corbin, you've been tearing this family apart for years. I'm done playing your game. I hung up before he could say anything else. I felt a strange sense of finality wash over me. It wasn't bitterness, just peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding everything together. I wasn't the one keeping the family intact. I had no more ties to the chaos they had created. I sat down on the couch, Narina beside me, and felt the weight of the past year lifting. The decisions I had made weren't easy, but they had brought me here, free from the control, free from the expectations. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew that this chapter of my life had come to a close. And for the first time, I was ready to write the next one. As we reach the end of Sabrina's journey, we're reminded that true strength comes from within. No matter how deep the betrayal, how heavy the weight of the past, we all have the power to break free and reclaim our lives. It's not about revenge, but about finding the courage to stand up for ourselves even when everyone else has turned away. What do you think? Can we truly heal after being hurt by those we love most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more powerful stories like Sabrina's, and join us for the next chapter of resilience and growth. Hello, my name is Cecilia, and a few months ago, my own sister, my flight attendant sister, stood over me in front of a full plane of strangers and screamed, "You're just a maid! How dare you sit in first class?" Then she slapped me, not out of anger, but out of certainty that no one would care. And maybe she was right, because this wasn't the first time they'd tried to erase me. They called it business, said I was too emotional, too quiet to lead. They took my name off what I built, locked it behind smiles and paperwork, and expected me to thank them for crumbs. But that morning, I made a call. And 10 minutes later, the airline began to fall apart. What happens when the person they buried is the one who designed the system? Would you stay silent or start pulling threads? It was a Thursday morning, one of those quiet, blue-lit kinds where the airport feels more like a hospital than a gateway to anywhere hopeful. Houston was already humid. I could feel it in my knees, in the way the air clung to my skin as I stepped onto the jet bridge. Gate B7, Flight 642, Atlanta bound. I didn't expect anything, maybe just a smooth ride and a cup of lukewarm coffee. That's all I was asking for. I boarded with the group before final call, kept my head down, and found my seat without any trouble. First class, seat 2A. I didn't flaunt it. No makeup, no designer anything. Just jeans, a soft sweatshirt, and my mother's old chain around my neck. The charm was tiny. Silver. A faint engraving on it. CQ. I wore it often, but not for show. It was the only thing of hers they hadn't taken. I sank into the plush leather, careful not to look anyone in the eye. A man in a navy blazer across the aisle gave me a once-over and then went back to his email. Good! That's how I wanted it. Quiet, simple, anonymous. Until I saw her. Valora. She walked down the aisle with that gait she practiced in heels since we were teenagers. Confident, deliberate, like she owned whatever space she walked into. Her blonde streaked bun was tight, uniform crisp, clipboard clutched like a badge of honor. She wasn't supposed to be on this flight. She froze when she spotted me. Her eyes scanned down, sweatshirt, sneakers, no makeup, and her mouth curled just slightly, not in surprise, not concern, disgust. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she muttered, just loud enough for the man in 2B to hear. He glanced at me, then looked away. I didn't answer. She stepped closer and leaned in, pretending to adjust the overhead bin. "Cleaning crew shouldn't touch leather seats, sis," she said under her breath. I smiled without teeth. "Good morning to you too, Valora." She didn't smile back. "That's first class. You're in the wrong seat." "I'm not." She straightened up. "Boarding pass?" I held out my phone, the screen already showing my digital ticket. She didn't take it, just scoffed. "You always did have a knack for finding back doors." There it was. That tone. The one she used at Mom's funeral when she said, "You're brave for showing up, considering everything." The one she used in front of our father when she made sure he never saw me as anything but the kid who couldn't hold down a job. Passengers were listening now. The man across the aisle, the woman with a baby 2 rows up. I heard the whisper. The tension when a family argument starts unraveling in public. Valora leaned forward again. "You don't belong here." I wanted to laugh. I almost did. Instead, I said calmly, "I paid for the seat." "No, you didn't." "You couldn't have." I stared at her, dead on. And then, because I've lived through this script so many times, I looked away. "You're just a maid," she said, louder this time, making sure everyone heard. "How dare you sit here?" The words hit like spit, sharp, wet, disgusting. My cheeks warmed, but not from shame, not anymore. A little boy across the aisle whispered to his mom, "Why is that lady so mean?" She patted his head and shushed him. The mom glanced at me, pity all over her face. One college-aged girl a few rows back had her phone out, tilted at just the right angle. Valora noticed it too. She turned to the camera and smiled. "Just resolving a seat confusion. We like to keep order." Order. That was rich, coming from the woman who lied her way into our mother's will. I stayed quiet. My hands stayed folded in my lap, but my brain was cataloging every reaction, every face. Valora leaned over, her voice tight. "You should get up before I call security." "I'm not moving." She laughed, sharp, practiced. "You think this makes you brave?" I didn't reply. Then, without warning, without ceremony, her hand lifted and slapped me across the face. The cabin gasped. Someone dropped a drink. Another hissed, "Jesus!" Time went funny, slower, sticky, the way it does in a car crash, or just before someone says something unforgivable at Thanksgiving. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I reached up, not to hit her back, not to defend myself, but to straighten my collar. My hand brushed the silver charm. I thought of Mom, of her fingers braiding my hair when Valora refused to help me get ready for senior pictures, of her voice telling me, "You don't need to yell to be right." I opened my purse, pulled out my phone, unlocked it with my thumb. Valora was still standing over me, still breathing hard. The passengers were silent. One call. I tapped it. 3 rings. Then it connected. No greeting, just my voice, even and low. It started. I hung up and leaned back in my seat, the sting on my cheek already fading into something else. Something clean, something steel. 10 minutes, I whispered to myself. 10 minutes. And this plane wouldn't be just a ride home. It would be the start of a reckoning. She thinks I'll walk off this plane. She's wrong. I sat there, hand still resting on the strap of my bag, the phone screen gone dark. Around me, a silence hung that didn't belong on a plane. No whir of conversation, no crinkling snack wrappers, not even the clack of laptop keys. Just stillness. Tense, observant, collective. The slap had landed minutes ago, but the echo of it lingered like heat after a burn. My cheek throbbed in a dull rhythm, not because of the pain, but because of the meaning behind it. I'd been silenced before in private. This time, she'd tried to do it in public. Valora always believed her voice was more valuable than my presence. A flight attendant, not Valora, leaned over from the front galley. She looked younger, maybe mid-20s, and her name tag read Lena. She spoke low, careful, but not quiet enough to hide her shock. "You went too far," she whispered to Valora. "That wasn't okay." Valora, standing rigid like a soldier caught out of line, turned to her with a smirk that looked more like a flinch. "She's my sister," she said too loudly. "It's just family drama. She'll be fine." I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just watched. Because I knew, finally, others were watching too. Behind me, someone muttered, "I got it on video." A teenager, judging by the voice. I didn't look. I didn't need to. I knew the video would live on longer than Valora's career ever would. I gently placed my hand on my cheek, not to soothe it, but to remind myself that I was still here. Present. Grounded. I felt the metal of the charm against my skin, the sea that barely shone anymore. My mother's necklace. That chain had hung around her neck in hospital rooms, at church, during Sunday dinners where Valora talked over me like I was part of the wallpaper. Mom used to say, "Cece, they'll try to erase you with a smile, but your silence can slice sharper than words, if you let it." I breathed in, slow, long, measured, not to calm down, but to stay precise. That slap wasn't the beginning. It was a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I never got to write. And now, I was editing the whole damn story. As Valora walked back down the aisle, trying to look unaffected, trying to hold her chin high, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window across from me. Her lips were tight, her shoulders squared, but her eyes were jittery. She knew. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough to be afraid. That made two of us, but only one of us was ready to act. I pressed the chain into my collarbone gently and let the memory come. The hospital room had smelled of sterile sheets and lavender lotion. Mom hated how hospitals always smelled like bleach and fear, so she made me bring her the little lotion bottle from her dresser. She had just enough strength to hold my hand, not squeeze it, just rest it in hers. Her eyes had gone dull with fatigue, but her voice, still sharp, still her. "Valora wants everything shiny, baby," she had said. "But you build the things that last. That's harder. But that's legacy." She slipped the chain off her neck and placed it around mine. "She won't come," Mom added, more sad than angry. "She's got some brand thing in LA. Just don't wait on her anymore." That was the last full conversation we had. The next day, Mom couldn't speak at all. And Valora? She didn't show until 2 days after the funeral. No apology, just a new handbag and a story about how her flight got delayed. Back in the cabin, I tucked the necklace inside my shirt. I wasn't trembling anymore. My hands had steadied. My mind had cleared. The old me would have stood up, gotten off the plane, told myself I didn't need this kind of humiliation. The old me would have cried in the airport bathroom and booked a cheap motel just to breathe. But I'd buried that version of myself years ago, right alongside the woman who raised me to be better than this moment. I sat taller, adjusting the strap of my purse, and felt my phone buzz lightly in response. One vibration, then a second. Confirmation. That call I'd made? It had triggered something. Not public, not yet. But inside. Quietly. Efficiently. The system was moving. I built things to protect people. I coded layers of emergency redundancies into systems that never gave me credit. They ran on my protocols, my architecture. My name might have been deleted from the front-facing roles, but the servers still whispered who really held the keys. I glanced out the window, nothing but runway and the distant shapes of terminals, but I wasn't looking for scenery. I was counting seconds. Valora returned from the galley and started a fake apology tour. "Sorry for the delay, folks," she said, loud enough to fill the first 4 rows. Sometimes family gets a little heated. You know how sisters are. I didn't respond. Neither did the passengers. She looked down at me again, narrowing her eyes. Cece, why don't you just move to economy so we can— I didn't break eye contact, and for the first time in our lives, she blinked first. No, I said, softly but clearly. Her jaw tightened. You don't want this to get worse. It already did. She opened her mouth again, but Lena stepped in behind her. She gently tapped Valora's shoulder. There's a message from corporate on the internal chat, Lena said. Valora's eyes darted to her tablet. Check it, Lena added, tone firmer than anyone expected from someone that young. Valora turned on her heels and walked away without another word. That's when I finally allowed myself to breathe, not because I was relieved, but because I could already see the dominoes starting to fall. My silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. I didn't watch the screen load. I knew what would appear. My fingers moved with a steady certainty I hadn't felt in years, inputting credentials I'd memorized, even though I hadn't used them since the day I became invisible. Authorization: Cecilia Quinn, System Architect. The confirmation blinked, then gave way to a dashboard only 5 people in the company ever accessed. I had built this interface when the airline was just an ambitious idea pitched in a dusty boardroom in Atlanta. Back then, Valora had no interest in back-end logistics. She wanted lights, camera crews, the shiny veneer of hospitality. Now, she'd learn what the foundation could really do. I tapped a line of commands, then another. Nothing showy, just one silent domino nudging the next. Execute contingency protocol. Level 3. As the system began its quiet movement, I leaned back, not bothering to close the tablet. I stared out the window again, watching the plane coast through soft clouds. My reflection was faint in the glass, just enough to remind me I still existed. But my mind had already traveled years back. It was a spring morning, 10 years ago. The reading of our mother's will had been scheduled just 3 weeks after we buried her. There was no time to breathe, no time to process. Valora didn't make it, of course. A brand launch in California, she'd said, like Mom had died on purpose to inconvenience her. So I sat alone at the long walnut table, surrounded by lawyers and my father, who looked at me like I was an intern in someone else's company. They called me sweetheart, dear, the quiet one, while shuffling papers I wasn't allowed to read thoroughly. I know it's a lot, my father said, sliding the stack in front of me. But it's just a standard adjustment. You'll still have your share. This just formalizes things a little differently. Valora's face is the one people recognize. You understand. At the time, I nodded. I was 30 years old. I had just buried the woman who raised me. I was tired, emotionally wrung out, and still sleeping on her couch because I couldn't bring myself to go back to the apartment I'd moved into the month before she got sick. They gave me Mom's pen to sign with. A vintage fountain pen she used for birthday cards, grocery lists, recipes. I still have it, still refill the ink manually, like she taught me. I remember how my hand trembled holding it. I remember asking, should I have someone look at this first? My father chuckled, like I'd told a cute joke. It's just paperwork, baby. We'll always take care of you. I signed. By the time I learned what I'd signed away, my stake in the back-end systems, my name on the patents, my seat on the board, it was already filed, notarized, and impossible to undo without a lawsuit I couldn't afford to start. From that day on, I became a contract consultant. No credit, no voice, just NDAs, silence, and the slow erosion of identity. Valora stepped into the spotlight as if she'd built the tech herself. Interviews, magazine features, a book deal. All the while, she told everyone I had left to focus on my own thing, when in truth, I'd been pushed into a broom closet and told to be grateful for the storage space. I didn't fight it then, because my mother was gone, because the people left didn't believe I had value, because it's hard to yell when the room has already decided you're mute. But something in me shifted as I sat there in first class, my tablet humming softly beside me. This was not that room. This time, I didn't need anyone's permission to speak. I reached into my purse and pulled out the pen, Mom's pen. I hadn't used it in years, not since that day. I unscrewed the cap and held it between my fingers, the cool metal grounding me. It still worked. It always did. That was the thing about quality craftsmanship. It endured, even if people didn't notice. In that moment, I wasn't the quiet sister. I wasn't the maid Valora loved to mock. I was the woman who built the system they all used, and I was done letting them forget it. I picked up the pen, flipped open my small leather planner, and wrote a single word across the week ahead. Justice. As I recapped it, I felt the familiar vibration from the tablet, a notification from the system confirming Phase 1 of the protocol had been acknowledged by internal compliance. The audit would begin automatically within the next hour. First, they'd notice performance logs weren't syncing. Then security keys would start blinking red. Then, a request for board member credential confirmation would land in Valora's inbox, and she wouldn't have the clearance to answer. It would start small, but they'd feel it. Every single person who helped erase me would feel it. And all of them would know exactly who lit the match. The man across the aisle caught me watching the screen and leaned in slightly. "Everything okay?" he asked, in the cautious tone of someone who had definitely seen the slap but didn't want to get involved. I smiled, soft but firm. "It will be." His eyes flicked to the tablet, then back to me. He gave a small nod and turned away, sensing, correctly, that this wasn't a moment for idle conversation. Valora walked past us again. She didn't look at me, but I saw her shoulders tighten. She felt it too. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need a stage. All I needed was what they never gave me credit for: access, knowledge, precision. And I had all three. I didn't need to say another word, just watching Valora's smile slip, inch by inch, as her tablet buzzed with the message I had just forwarded. That was enough for now. Her hand reached for the device slowly, like it might bite her. She tapped the screen. I knew the exact moment she read the subject line. Her posture stiffened. Her lips parted just slightly. Then came the color, rushing into her cheeks like heat from a slap that finally landed in reverse. A passenger 2 seats back, a woman with kind eyes and travel-worn hands, leaned forward slightly. "Is everything all right, miss?" Valora blinked hard and forced a smile that had no warmth behind it. "Just a little tech glitch," she said. "Nothing to worry about." Glitch. That was always her word when something she couldn't control started unraveling. I glanced down at my own screen. The thread was open, plain as day. The email she had sent 6 months earlier to the PR director and 3 mid-level managers. Subject: Media Prep. Exclude Cecilia. Content: If she ever flies, put her in economy. Don't comp her, don't seat her near execs. She's not our image. We can't afford inconsistency. The kind of message people in power send when they're used to not being questioned. When they think there's no record, no one watching, when they assume the person being talked about will never have the keys to the vault, she forgot I built the vault. I didn't even need to forward it beyond the internal contacts, just enough to start the fire, just enough to let the right people know that someone wasn't just holding receipts, but willing to share them. I closed the thread and folded my hands in my lap, waiting. Valora walked past me again, headed toward the galley. Her heels didn't click as confidently this time. One flight attendant, a new one, young, gave her a sideways glance, then turned away before Valora could catch it. The plane itself felt different now, not in turbulence or temperature, but in tone. The passengers weren't whispering anymore, but there was a quiet energy, the kind of stillness that comes when people start realizing something's off and wonder how long before it unravels publicly. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, not to rest, but to remember. 3 years ago, I found that email, buried in a system folder I wasn't supposed to still have access to. It came up in a routine backup, one I was doing as a favor for a junior staffer who'd never met me face to face. I read it once, twice. I remember staring at the words. She's not our image. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there at my small kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen with a coffee gone cold in my hand. That day, I saved the email, not because I planned to use it right away, but because I knew there would be a time, and it wasn't going to be me who came looking for it. They would bring the moment to me, just like today. They always do. Valora returned a few minutes later. Her face looked different now, tighter, drained. She walked up the aisle again but didn't stop at my row, didn't even glance my way. Her smile was gone, so was her certainty. My phone buzzed softly. It was a message from the same internal account that had tipped me off years ago, a name I knew but had never spoken aloud. Saw the email. You finally sent it. About time. I typed back 2 words. Appreciate you. Another ping followed. You're not the only one with files. I didn't reply, but my heart, which had been clenched for most of this flight, loosened just slightly. There was power in not being the only one anymore. There was power in not being alone. A child up front started crying, and a parent tried to soothe them with a toy. Valora walked past them stiffly, muttering something about passenger comfort protocol. I could see her hands trembling slightly as she reached for a napkin she didn't need. The guilt doesn't always show in speeches. Sometimes it leaks out of your fingers when no one's supposed to be looking. I stared at her back and thought about the years I'd let her rewrite our narrative. She always said she was the visionary, the face, the voice. She never mentioned I was the structure, the architect, the one who made sure the house didn't fall. But it was starting to, brick by brick. I opened my phone again, drafted a new message. Subject: your image just made itself clear. Recipients: senior leadership, HR, compliance. Body: please see the attached communication from one of your brand representatives. I assume you'll know how to respond from here. Attachment: Valora email, mediaprep.pdf. I hit send and exhaled. No one around me knew the war that just moved 3 steps forward, but I knew. And soon, they would too. This was no longer about revenge. This was about correction, alignment, balance. Valora could still wear her uniform and walk the aisle, but the ceiling above her was beginning to crack. And this time, I was the one holding the flashlight. My finger hovered over the screen for just a second longer than it needed to. Send all was lit up in a soft green at the bottom of the draft. One click and the chain would break for good. I tapped it. No fireworks, no music. Just the quiet confirmation. Message sent. It was enough. I slid the tablet back into my bag with the same care I used when folding my mother's sweaters for donation after she passed. Controlled, steady, final. And then I let my hand find its way to the small silver charm resting against my collarbone. I pressed my thumb against it, the way I had 1,000 times when I needed to remember who raised me to survive without applause. You don't need noise to be known, Siti, she'd once told me. Let the world yell. You just keep standing. I let that voice settle deep into my chest like a stone anchoring me. The plane hummed beneath me. Normal. Predictable. But everything above that floor was shifting. I watched Valora out of the corner of my eye as she floated down the aisle again, this time toward me. Her walk didn't have the bounce it did when she first boarded. Something about her looked tentative. I didn't flinch when she stopped next to my seat. Didn't look up at her. Not right away. I suppose you think you've made your point, she said, voice low, but trying to carry. My gaze met hers, calm. I haven't even started, I replied. There was no fire in my tone, no raised pitch. I didn't need that anymore. Valora's jaw shifted. She tried to laugh it off, but the edges of her smile frayed. You're not supposed to be in this seat. I tilted my head. I'm exactly where I belong. She scoffed, loud enough for a few nearby passengers to hear. You really think flying first class makes you somebody? No, I said, and then turned slightly so my voice carried. But building the entire infrastructure this airline runs on might. A ripple of stillness moved through the rows. Someone behind me coughed. A man to my right paused with his fork in the air. Valora blinked hard. You helped with back-end systems. That doesn't mean... I reached into my purse and pulled out my badge. I didn't flash it dramatically, just held it there between us. The glossy laminate caught the light, illuminating the bold black letters. Cecilia Quinn, Systems Architect, Founding Partner, EtherCorp Holdings. Her face changed, the kind of change that starts in the stomach and rises slowly, visibly, until it hits the skin like a rash of realization. You erased me, I said, just loud enough. I'm just putting my name back where it was. I held her gaze, watched her attempt to claw back some control. "I didn't erase anyone," she muttered. But her voice had shrunk. Her shoulders weren't square anymore. Her hands fidgeted at her sides. "You called me a maid, in front of strangers," I reminded her. "You slapped me across the face, publicly. And now you're going to pretend none of that happened?" I was angry. "You blindsided me." "No," I said, firm now. "You didn't expect me to show up in a seat you don't think I deserve. Because you built your entire brand on pretending I didn't exist." She opened her mouth again, but before she could spit out another defense, a voice from across the aisle interrupted us. An older man, gray beard, a cap from a veterans organization on his lap, leaned forward. "She said she built the system," he said, directing his comment to Valora, but his eyes never left me. "Sounds to me like this seat belongs to her more than anyone." A few passengers murmured agreement. Someone clapped once. Awkward, but sincere. Valora backed away. She didn't say another word. She turned and disappeared into the galley without looking back. The air felt different now. I let out a breath, not because I was tired, but because the pressure that had lived in my chest for over a decade had cracked open. It wasn't gone, but it had a vent now. Beside me, the man in the blazer gave me a brief nod, then turned back to his magazine. That was it. No grand applause. No standing ovation. Just truth, finally recognized. I pulled out my tablet again. Not because I needed to start over, but because I was about to finish what should have never been paused. Protocol 2, Cascade Email, Release to Board and Media. I typed the command slowly, with purpose. The first wave had gone out to internal systems, HR, operations, training. This next one, external affairs, news partners, oversight committees. My lawyer, who had been waiting for this for 6 years. I paused for a beat. This time, I wasn't just forwarding receipts. I was letting the world see the difference between curated perfection and covered-up rot. I tapped send. The confirmation beeped quietly, and I whispered to myself, not for show, not for drama, but for the little girl I used to be, who once typed code in a borrowed hoodie while her sister posed for cameras. One more release. The next one won't be quiet. By the time my screen blinked the final confirmation, Stage 2, initiated, I knew I didn't need to watch the rest. It was already moving. My part, at least for now, was done. So I slid the tablet into the side pocket of my tote, leaned back into the seat, and finally let my body settle. The hum of the engines beneath my feet felt louder somehow, like it had tuned itself to my heartbeat. I glanced at the cabin clock. 9:43 a.m. The countdown began. 10 minutes. That's all I'd promised myself. Not to destroy Valora, no. That would have been too easy. This wasn't about her. Not entirely. This was about pulling back the curtain that she, and the company, had so carefully drawn to keep people like me invisible. I watched her move across the cabin, clipboard in hand, smile strained but intact. She was still trying. Still holding the roll like it hadn't already cracked open, still talking to passengers like nothing was happening. "Would you care for a blanket?" she asked a man in business attire across from me. He declined, his eyes flicking from her face to mine and back. He wasn't sure where to look anymore. At 9:46, I saw Lena, the junior flight attendant, approach Valora with her tablet. She leaned in, whispered something. Valora's face tensed, and for a moment her eyes darted toward me before she masked the movement with a sip of water from her crew bottle. I knew that look. It wasn't just irritation, it was recognition. She knew. The system was no longer hers to steer. She may have worn the uniform, but the engine beneath her feet? That was mine. At 9:48, her corporate phone buzzed. Not the public line, not the one she used for passengers. The internal line, reserved for emergency notifications and executive alerts. She answered it in the galley, voice low but sharp. "What? I don't understand. Wait. No one said anything to me." I caught snippets, even from my seat. "Compliance? On what basis? Who filed this?" Then silence. She didn't move for a moment, just stared at the wall like she was trying to read between the metal panels. At 9:49, Lena re-emerged, her hands lightly shaking. She moved down the aisle slowly and deliberately, eyes scanning the cabin like she was preparing for impact. She wasn't trying to hide it anymore. The crew felt it. Everyone did. At 9:51, I received a push notification. Stage 1, protocol confirmed. Crisis ops en route to B7. I pressed my fingers against the necklace at my collar. I didn't speak, didn't move, just breathed. 2 minutes later, the front door opened mid-flight prep. That never happened. Not during taxi, not during cabin service, unless something was seriously wrong, and something was. 2 individuals in suits boarded with airport security behind them. They didn't wear badges on lanyards or belts. Their presence alone was identification enough. They walked past row after row without pause. Calm, professional, direct. They stopped in front of Valora. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we need you to gather your things." The words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. They landed like a switch flipped in the cabin air. Valora looked up, stunned. "I'm on duty. You can't just—" "We're acting under directives from Internal Risk Management and FAA compliance. Please gather your belongings, now." Someone near the front gasped. A phone came up, camera light blinking. A ripple of murmurs moved from row to row, like a current. No one shouted. No one interrupted. I didn't record. I didn't even blink. Valora didn't scream, didn't argue. But I watched as her fingers trembled when she reached for her satchel. She kept her eyes forward, past the crew, past the passengers, refusing to meet anyone's gaze, especially mine. As she was escorted off the plane, the pilot came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're addressing a personnel matter in accordance with federal regulation. We'll be resuming service shortly." There was no sarcasm in his tone, just clarity. Then something I didn't expect. Someone clapped, just once. Then again. And then, quietly, it spread. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a standing ovation. But it was enough. A moment of shared understanding. Not celebration, not spite, just acknowledgement that sometimes people do get held accountable. I looked out the window beside me, not because I needed a view, but because for the first time in years, I saw myself reflected clearly in the glass. I wasn't blurred, I wasn't shadowed, I wasn't invisible. My phone buzzed once more. I opened the message. Stage 2 approved. Full audit inbound. Legal teams en route. My thumb hovered over the reply button. Instead, I just smiled. Quiet and complete. If they buried me, they forgot I was the one who coated the soil. That thought held steady in my chest as the final upload bar reached 100%. The file now lived in multiple internal repositories, the kind of digital breadcrumbs that couldn't be swept under the rug. Training abuse footage, whistleblower reports, suppressed exit interviews. Everything they'd hidden behind polished PR and performance bonuses now had a heartbeat of its own. And it was pulsing straight into the inboxes of people who, until this very moment, pretended not to know my name. I shifted in my seat, cracked my knuckles slowly, and checked the time. 10:08 a.m. Somewhere down at the terminal, the ripple effect had begun. The flight remained airborne, routine and humming, but the ground was already cracking. My screen lit up again with a secure ping from the system. Passenger interviews underway, B7 under active audit. Ops confirming data request sweep. It was a language only a few of us would fully understand. I had designed the entire crisis response framework for this company, its redundancy layers, its escalation logic, its evidence protocols. Back when my name was still on the founding charter, back before Valora decided my face didn't fit the image. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same system they used to erase me was now the one I used to write myself back in. Another alert popped up, this one simpler. Director VP, account deactivated, manual lockout confirmed. I let out a quiet breath, but it wasn't relief. It was something colder, calculated. And then came the ping that made my stomach pause. Incoming. Harold Quinn. My father. For a second, I didn't move. My hand hovered above the screen. Then, with the same careful detachment I used when reviewing legal binders or contract loopholes, I accepted the call. His voice came through tight, clipped. not angry, but annoyed, as though I'd dented the hood of his reputation and the insurance wouldn't cover it. Cecilia, Dad, what in God's name are you doing? I stared at the seat back in front of me, following protocol. This circus? You're dragging the family through the mud. No, I said, calm but firm. I'm dragging the truth out from under it. He exhaled like I was a child who had spoken out of turn. You've always been too emotional, he said. That's why you never led. You build things, but leadership requires distance, control. I blinked slowly. No, Dad. What you call leadership is really silence, and I've been quiet for a decade. Valora made things work. She knew how to talk to people, how to represent the brand. She kept the family from being embarrassed. I felt it then. The sting wasn't new. It had calcified over the years, but hearing it so directly, especially now, reopened something raw. She lied. She humiliated me. She stole credit for everything I built. She built the image, Cecilia. You built the system. Don't confuse value with visibility. I let a long silence bloom between us. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to say something venomous, but all I did was whisper, "And you helped." The words landed heavier than I expected. I backed the daughter who people believed in, he muttered. I closed the call without saying another word. He didn't call back. I sat still, hands folded tight in my lap. Not trembling, not anymore, just still. He was never going to see me as anything other than the support beam behind Valora's house of mirrors. I looked out the window again, then turned back to my bag. I reached in and pulled out my mother's phone, her old flip model I'd kept all these years. It hadn't powered on in a while. I'd preserved the SIM, backed up the contents. Her final message had been uploaded to the cloud the day she passed. I tapped into the voice notes folder and scrolled to the last entry. Cece, if you're hearing this, I know what they've tried to do. Her voice cracked, but it was strong. I wish I could have done more to stop it. I wish I could have left clearer papers, more protections. But you were always the quiet one. That's your power. They'll underestimate you. They already have. I wiped a tear from the corner of my eye. Not sorrow, just clarity. That's why I taught you how to build, she continued. Charm fades, faces change, but code, systems, that lasts. So if they try to silence you, use what you built. That's the legacy. That's you. The message ended. I closed my eyes for just a moment, then reopened the tablet. A new protocol stared back at me. Protocol 3, Media Trigger, Public Education Release. I didn't tap it yet. Instead, another alert blinked across the screen. Would you like to upload archived training abuse footage to public complaint record? It was a simple question. Behind it, hours of documented mistreatment, flight attendants screamed at for not wearing enough makeup, gate agents ridiculed for accents, older staff pushed out under the guise of rebranding, all swept under a rug stitched together with NDAs and spin. I stared at the prompt, my finger hovering. Then I clicked, yes. The upload began. This wasn't just about me anymore. It never really had been. The cabin was still dimly lit when I reopened the secure channel on my tablet. The sun outside had risen, filtering faint orange light through the window beside me. In that glow, I could see dust suspended in air, dancing quietly, almost mockingly, around Valora's now vacant seat. I tapped into the live boardroom feed. The screen flickered once, then resolved into a tidy, sterile conference room. Not on this plane, not even in this terminal, but thousands of miles away in the high-rise headquarters of EtherCorp, the parent company, the real ones in charge. 3 board members sat at a long glass table, backlit by daylight and framed with silence. No greetings, no small talk. They knew why I called. I adjusted my posture, angled the camera, and began speaking. Not with emotion, not with apology, just truth. This isn't about an upgrade, I said clearly, ensuring my voice didn't quiver. It's about a system that made it easier to bury contributions than confront bias. A system that rewarded charisma and punished competence. That allowed image to silence substance. No one interrupted. Today, I was assaulted on your flight by your lead crew member, who also happens to be my sister. The same sister your executives elevated because she photographed better, spoke smoother, and, most importantly, knew how to use my silence as a stepping stone. I paused. Her name is Valora Kane. You know it well, but you may not recall mine. I held up my ID badge, letting the camera focus. Cecilia Quinn, systems architect, founding partner. The person who designed your logistics spine and authored the original crisis response protocols you're now watching unfold. Still silence from the room, but I could feel the shift through the screen. The sharp inhale someone tried to stifle. The twitch in the chair leg of the man to the left. It wasn't shock. They'd known. They'd just counted on me staying quiet. Too late. One of them finally spoke. Ms. Quinn, we acknowledge receipt of the incident reports and media files submitted. We're prepared to offer a formal public apology, financial restitution, and, if you're willing, a platform to speak about diversity and integrity across our branches. A stage. They were offering me a microphone and a PR tour, but I wasn't looking to talk. I don't want a stage, I said simply. I want reform. Another pause. I let it hang. I want every executive who signed off on the erasure of my name off the board. I want every HR head who buried complaints under team cohesion protocols removed, and I want Valora Kane permanently banned from representing, working for, or contracting with any brand under your umbrella. The chairman looked at someone off-screen, clearly receiving a real-time legal opinion. Do you have proof of intentional suppression? I smiled. You're already watching it. He nodded once, slowly. We'll begin formal removals immediately. I didn't thank them. I didn't smile. Instead, I opened the staff access interface, one I still had remote admin clearance to. One by one, the names turned gray. Vice President, Ground Operations, access revoked. Executive Director, Brand Communications, account disabled. Valora Kane. Permanent ban, processed. On a separate screen, I saw a CNN affiliate camera pan over Valora outside the terminal. She stood behind tinted sunglasses, arms folded tightly. A reporter shoved a mic toward her. I built this brand, she said, voice shaky. She was just back-end. Her words, as always, polished on the surface and rotted underneath. But the public had already shifted. Headlines began to scroll. Fall of a Queen. Rise of the Quiet Architect. In a thread that was already climbing Twitter's trending topics, a flight attendant named Carla posted, I was told to hide my accent, to wear heavier makeup, to never sit during breaks. Valora called me non-camera ready on my third day. Cecilia's not just clearing her name, she's clearing space for all of us. Another post from a former gate agent read, she said what we never could. And then came the final blow. The video. I uploaded it without hesitation. A recorded training session, captured 3 years ago. Valora was in front of the class, arms crossed. We need pretty. We need perfect teeth. No tattoos, no old jewelry, no scuffed shoes. We don't want anyone asking, is this woman tired, sick, or just low class? That's not our brand. The room in the video was quiet, too quiet. Like even then, they knew something was wrong. I didn't need to say anything. The footage spoke louder than any press release. Thousands of comments flooded in within minutes. She bullied us in silence. Every line she said, I heard it with my own ears. We worked in the dark. She got the spotlight. Finally, someone flipped the switch. The momentum wasn't mine alone anymore. And that was exactly the point. I sat quietly, rereading the notifications as they flooded in. Resignations, internal memos, emergency PR drafts being leaked. Then, one final alert from legal. You are no longer bound by the 2014 NDA. Record expunged. All proprietary acknowledgments reinstated. I stared at that line for a long moment, then deleted the file myself. It didn't need to exist anymore. I didn't need permission to tell my story. As the plane began to descend into Atlanta, the city skyline rose ahead through the soft layer of cloud. The sun had climbed higher, warmer now, stretching across the tarmac and casting long shadows behind us. I reached into my bag, pulled out a notepad, and for the first time in years, wrote my full name at the top of a clean sheet. Cecilia Quinn. Then I crossed out the next line, consultant, back-end logistics, and replaced it with architect, rebuilder, quiet storm. The collapse wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of explosive undoing people expect from scandal. It unfolded like paper burning from the corner inward, slow, quiet, irreversible. And when it was done, there was no ash left to sweep, just space. 1 year later, I stood in Concourse A of Hartsfield-Jackson International, not with a suitcase or a boarding pass, but with a simple envelope in my hands and a small speech folded inside it. The terminal had changed, or maybe I had. The same walls, same announcements buzzing from overhead, same scent of too strong coffee near Gate 12. But nothing about it felt hostile anymore. No shadows hovered behind my steps. No eyes followed me, questioning why I was there. Because now, they all knew. I made my way to a modest stage set up near the windows that overlooked the runway. Nothing flashy, just a small platform with chairs for a few media reps, a banner that read, "The Quinn Initiative Launch," and a microphone that I requested stay turned off unless the press insisted. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to pass something forward. I stepped up to the podium as invited guests found their seats, leaders in aviation safety, former airline staff, 2 young women sitting up front who looked about 20 and nervous. They were the first recipients of the new fund we'd created. Daughters of single mothers who worked in custodial services, women who, like my own mother, were rarely thanked and often forgotten. The envelope I held contained their scholarship awards, as well as hand-signed letters from me. I didn't talk long. I didn't need to. "This isn't a redemption arc," I said softly. "No microphone needed. This is a correction. For every person who was ever told, 'You're not the right look,' or 'Stay out of the way.' For every woman who cleaned floors while others claimed the spotlight, you were always enough. You just weren't seen." The crowd didn't applaud. They just listened, and that meant more. After the ceremony, I walked through the terminal slowly, not out of sentiment, but because I finally could. Without pressure behind my ribs, without Valora's voice in my head, mocking my steps, without the sting of invisibility. Near Gate A27, a little girl with thick braids and a purple backpack stood in front of one of the digital kiosks that displayed rotating employee profiles and historic contributors to the company. She was staring at the screen. When I approached, she turned toward me. Her eyes were wide, not with awe, but with that honest curiosity children carry without apology. "Are you the lady whose name is up there?" she asked, pointing to the screen. My photo wasn't glamorous. It wasn't staged. It was from 10 years ago in a lab coat, smiling over a line of code on a whiteboard. I knelt so I could look her in the eye. "Yes," I said. "It took a long time to get there." She nodded, satisfied. "My mom said you built the smart stuff, not the pretty stuff." I chuckled. "That's true." She grinned, then ran off to catch up with her family. I stood up slowly and watched her disappear into the flow of travelers, and I realized in that moment, I didn't need the whole world to know me, just enough people, the right people. From a distance, I saw Valora. She didn't see me right away. She was wiping down a counter in the lobby of a small private clinic attached to the concourse, those hybrid lounges they use for airport health services. Her uniform was plain, no name tag. Her posture was quiet, not defeated, but reserved. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vengeance, just a still kind of closure. A former flight attendant walked by, someone who used to laugh at Valora's jokes in the break room, who once told me, "You should smile more, it'll help you get promoted." She caught sight of Valora, hesitated, and walked past without a word. Valora looked up, eyes flicking toward her, then toward me. For one suspended breath, our eyes locked. There was no nod, no smirk, no apology. Just an understanding. We had both lost something, but only one of us had earned what we kept. I turned away first, not out of pride, but because I didn't need anything more from her. That chapter had closed the moment I wrote my own name back into the story. Later that night, back home, I sat in my small office, the one that still had Mom's sewing box in the corner and her framed "You Are Enough" sticky note taped to my desk lamp. I pulled up the new internal site the company launched last week, a living digital archive honoring women in systems development, policy reform, and whistleblower protection. I scrolled slowly, then saw it. Cecilia Quinn Systems Architect, founding partner, co-creator, the Quinn Protocol's legacy contributor, internal equity infrastructure. I reached up and touched the silver necklace now resting visibly against my blouse. I used to hide it. Now I let it catch the light. Not because the charm changed, but because I had. I logged out of the archive and turned off the lamp. Not everyone who gets erased finds their way back. I knew that. I knew how rare it was to survive the silencing and still choose to speak. But I also knew what my mother whispered once. You don't have to be loud to be remembered. You just have to leave something they can't rewrite. And I had. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that changes the system, it's the one that refuses to stay silent any longer. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about legacy, quiet strength, and reclaiming what was stolen in the shadows. So now I'll ask you, have you ever been erased? Not by strangers, but by your own family? Tell me in the comments. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe. There's more truth coming, chapter by chapter.